All right, and I think we're live. I hope we're live. Otherwise, I've messed up severely. Welcome, comrades. How are you keeping? Happy Christmas, happy holidays, etc. I hope you're enjoying this time of year. Your family and friends are all doing well. Today, we are joined by the legendary, spooky, scary Socialist, who you may recall from having debunked literally every anti-communist myth ever on his YouTube channel last year. Spooky, please introduce yourself to the audience, telling viewers a little bit about how you came to be a left-wing YouTuber and how you rose to prominence.
Yeah, so I started my channel a few years ago. I began sort of my career sort of animating left-wing memes. I was just getting into animation. They were very crude stickman animation. And I was like, this is fun, but I want to make educational content, something that's like meaningful. And so I made the jump sort of to make a full video sort of on Stalin. And I think I called it very provocatively, was Stalin really that bad? And like, I mean, that title, I laugh every time I see it, but that video it blew up a little bit. It got me a couple hundred, maybe up to 1,000 subscribers. And I made another video on Cuba, and that blew me up to like maybe 5,000 subscribers. And then I took a 2-year-long break, and I came back with the debunking video. And that really, really blew up. I think it's sitting at like 800,000 something views. And so that blew my channel up to where it is now, which is roughly 40,000. And I've been very on and offline with my presence because it's a lot of pressure, like you make a couple of videos. I have like 3 full videos on my channel and like 40,000 subscribers. So it's like, you really don't want to be like pumping out content where you're like, saying incorrect or wrong information. So it's a lot of pressure on me personally to get that, get correct information and make meaningful videos. So I usually try to be very like mild with my internet presence. I usually try to avoid like sectarianism. I usually try to avoid like offline or non-video appearances. So this is actually my first time doing a live stream. So this is the first time I've actually been speaking without a script, because my videos are very processed and you get a very processed version of me. So yeah, it's my first time doing a stream, and I'm excited to be talking off the cuff with you, Paul. So thanks for inviting me on here.
That's an absolute pleasure. It's great to have you here. I'm sorry to say that streaming, you mentioned this issue of making videos, and it can often encourage people, especially if you're working to a schedule, like if you have to pump out a video every single week, it can often encourage people to, I suppose, really put out very unprincipled positions on things that they haven't really studied enough, no investigation, no right to speak kind of stuff, and everybody's encouraged to have like a really hot take on this and that and the other, and to be honest with you, I think streaming might be one of the worst places for that, because people will ask questions in the live chat and they'll ask you to give like a really nuanced take about this, that, or the other, and you'll just find yourself saying absolute nonsense because you've been talking, you're probably delirious after talking for about 2 hours, and so you just say something really ridiculous, and the next day you realize how stupid that thing you just said was. And then there's a clip of it going around online. It's like, oh no, shit, I got cancelled for something I didn't really mean. Okay, fuck. All right. Anyway, so I apologize for drawing you into streaming and this this world. But I will say,
No.
What you said, I think is quite interesting and quite fun as well. In that the videos that you're making are very they're filtered through, and you've crafted scripts to be informative and educational and funny and all this sort of stuff. I have this huge problem where whenever I write scripts, they're just incredibly dry and boring. I try to convey like the message as concisely as possible, and anytime I try to write like a joke in or something like that, I just cringe so badly. I realize, because my sense of humor is so silly, like dad humor, I tell like dad jokes and stuff like that. So I'm like, okay, maybe I'm just gonna leave that out and do a really dry video. Okay. But
I think your videos are honestly very fun. It honestly depends on what type of audience you're trying to court. Like your videos, your Socialism 101 series is honestly very good. And having that, mostly informative side of things is, I think it's a very valuable contribution. And jokes, while important, they're also not central. So I think your videos are just very important overall, even if you're not making constant references and niche ironic memes.
I appreciate you saying it. It's very nice to say, but yeah, maybe I need to liven them up a little bit. It is dry and difficult to watch. 20 minutes of this weird Irish lad droning on, who you can only understand about half of what he says, so you need to turn on the captions anyway, the subtitles. Someone actually in the
That's
chat
the
there,
appeal.
someone in the chat there asked me, the atheist Q&A, how do you pronounce third? Third, how do you pronounce three? First, second, third. Everyone loves the Irish accent until we say that. Yeah, unfortunately, we don't do the H's in that word. Anyway, yeah, there's a total tangent for you. But speaking of unprincipled rants, talking about this, that, or the other, whatever questions you have, for comrades who do have questions, just pop them into the live chat, and we'll take them. We'll write them down on a separate notepad that we have, and we'll take them one by one. Just make sure to start the questions with @MarxistPaulLive, and then I'll be able to see them. They'll be highlighted, and we'll answer them as we go. All right, so thank you very much for being here. This is going to be a lot of fun. I'm really interested to hear about your political development over the years, and how you've come to studying Marxism, Leninism, Maoism today.
Okay, so it's actually very interesting. When I started making my videos, I was actually a Marxist-Leninist, and I sort of came to Marxism, Leninism, sort of around the same time I was really discovering my own identity and my own sexuality. So like around the time I sort of began realizing, I like people of the same sex or people of the same gender. I also sort of started sort of being attracted to communist politics, and sort of there's this very old niche communist meme, sort of a fully automated luxury gay space communism.
Yeah.
And for very old, I'm not sure it's
Classic.
much relevant today. But sort of like seeing that sort of very much interested me in like what is gay communism? What does that mean? And what does it mean to be, what does communist politics have to do with sexuality? And so sort of that led me sort of on the path to Marxism, Leninism, and sort of through sort of, internet memes and jokes and sort of like irony a lot. So it's very internet poison communism. And it really wasn't until I started reading theory, that I slowly started to like, really ground my understanding of communism in sort of scientific socialism. And sort of with that understanding of socialism as a science, I naturally sort of tended towards Maoism. And so like for a while, I think in the debunking video era, like I was, vacillating between ML and, like MLM. So I was like, oh, is Maoism really, a third stage of revolutionary science? I mean, is it really universal enough? And sort of I did a lot of reading. I think you had JMP on a stream a while ago, and I read Continuity and Rupture, and I was like, okay, like it addressed pretty much all of my concerns I had with MLM as like a universal or as a third stage of revolutionary science. So I was like, okay, I pretty much had my theoretical sort of problems with MLM sort of solved. So I'm just going to make that leap. And so for me, I divide sort of the appeal of Maoism and why I became a Maoist into three parts. So first is the practical. So if you're going to be a revolutionary communist, you have to sort of pay attention to which trend is sort of the most practically active, which one is waging class struggle the most militantly and most actively. And, if you're dedicated to communism and you're looking at that criteria, sort of the only trend that meets that sort of criteria is Maoism. Sort of the People's War in India, the People's War in the Philippines. Sort of that shows sort of that Maoism is it's a practically living and breathing trend that is sort of constantly, and even today, being forged through the crucible of class struggle. And so the second part that sort of brought me to Maoism was also the theoretical. So as communists, we know that ideas come from practice. And so because Maoism is still actively being practiced, that also means we're getting a lot of very valuable theory from Maoists, right? Even today. So like in 2020, I believe, just last year, Comrade Ajit published a collection of essays on post-isms where he addresses post-colonialism and postmodernism, sort of having a very Maoist view on these issues. And, you have Comrade Joma writing sort of from the perspective of the struggle in the Philippines, and Ajit, or I already mentioned Ajit, and Anuradha Gandhi. And although she's passed away, sort of her experience sort of as a woman in the militant struggle in India also has very valuable theory. So like theoretically, Maoism is also just very alive and breathing, and you get a lot of interesting interventions from Maoists. And sort of also like as a, from the perspective of a queer person, Maoism is also very attractive, specifically because of this theoretical activity. So as a queer communist, I'm dedicated to like trying to find a sort of coherent revolutionary theory of sexuality. And sort of Maoism is the most promising sort of trend for a revolutionary theory of sexuality, primarily because of its theoretical activity. So, for example, proletarian feminism. I find the developments of proletarian feminism to be just very, very fascinating by itself. Sort of, you have Gandhi coming in, sort of with her experience in the revolution, cutting through the BS of of
Yes.
socialist feminism, of radical feminism, saying this is what's useless, this is what isn't useless, this is what's useful for actual emancipation. And sort of for me, right, sort of seeing Maoism sort of advance very, very far in sort of the women question also leads me to think, hey, if the woman question is tied to sort of the question of sexuality and queerness, and so if Maoism can put forward this proletarian feminism, who's to say that Maoism won't be able to put forward a new revolutionary theory of sexuality, a new sort of queer liberation? And so for me, sort of that theory is a very core component of my attraction to Maoism as a gay person. And the third component, so we had practical and theory. And so the third component that attracted me to Maoism is just personal. So I haven't been very open about my personal life, but I am Filipino. And I am also a queer person. So as a queer Filipino, you see your fellow gay Filipinos waging people's war in the Philippines. And it's you're going to feel some sort of affinity for that revolutionary trend. So sort of, for me, those are the three reasons why I came to Marxism, Leninism, Maoism.
That's amazing. I had no idea that you were Filipino. That's so cool. Yeah, that must be really inspiring to see the comrades in the Philippines carrying a people's war, and also I suppose we can't forget that the CPP MPA. I mean, if I'm not mistaken, I think that they were among the first to actually carry out gay marriages, basically anywhere in the world. I think it was in 2001, 2002, around about that time. But it was normalized then, and it's still illegal to this day under the fascist Duterte regime. In the Philippines, in the old state in the Philippines, it's still illegal to this day. So you can see how tremendously progressive and useful it is, and as you said, how useful it is in terms of actual emancipation. Actual questions, excuse me, that are affecting people to this day. Yeah, so those are some really, really interesting points there, and I really appreciate how you linked the question of theory to practice, because they're absolutely inseparable. This question of Marxism, Leninism, Maoism, as you mentioned, as the third stage of revolutionary science or revolutionary theory. I think it is worth taking a moment and really diving into that and fleshing out what we mean by that, and why we actually see it as this way. Because of course there is the element of, well, there's actual revolutionary people's wars going on right now. The oppressed masses are turning towards Maoism in seeking national liberation and in seeking new democracy, socialist revolution, and so on. But theoretically, I think it's useful for us just to take a moment to just really parse out what we mean when we say that it's a higher stage of Marxism. And the way I always have conceived of it, and the way I would sort of explain it, would be that Marxism, Leninism, Maoism refines and advances Marxism in each of its three core components: philosophy, political economy, and scientific socialism. The philosophies deepened by Mao's refinements of dialectical materialism through the universal law of contradiction, through things like, for example, primary and secondary contradictions, antagonistic and non-antagonistic contradictions, etc., and the Marxist theory of knowledge. In terms of political economy, Maoism provides the theory of bureaucrat capitalism, that politics must be in command of the economy, necessitating struggle at both the superstructure as well as the base. And in terms of scientific socialism, Maoism emphasizes the class struggle continues in socialism, and particularly through cultural revolution. And it also teaches us, of course, and very, very importantly, how to capture power and keep it in the hands of the working class, which is maybe where other earlier iterations of Marxism have fallen down, And of course, it needs also be said that MLM really provides this fully developed proletarian military theory that is protracted people's war, Beyond that, these teachings have taken us to the highest point in proletarian revolutionary history, beyond this initial proletarian revolution, and also to combating this kind of revisionist backslide into capitalism, and that point that I'm referring to, of course, is China's great proletarian cultural revolution. It's also important to keep in mind that other things like developments around the Vanguard Party itself. MLM refines our understanding of the Vanguard Party. The party is no longer viewed as a monolith, rather as a struggle of unity of opposites. And this revitalizes line struggle within the party, because unfortunately it is a trend that if we look back at, for example, the Soviet experience, we can see how criticism, self-criticism, and all of these kinds of things, line struggle really, it became formalized. It dried up and fell to formality, I suppose. But MLM really emphasizes this element of criticism and self-criticism, and from this criticism and self-criticism, party rectification campaigns can take place. As you mentioned, for example, the comrades in the Philippines who have undergone numerous rectification campaigns at this stage. And importantly, MLM grants us the theory of the mass line, which externally reconnects the party to the masses and internally reconnects the party rank and file to its central leadership. And of course, lastly, MLM contributes the concentric construction, which utilizes the three weapons of the revolution, that is, the party, the People's Army, and the United Front. And this is really, really important for comrades who are really interested in socialism today and really interested in revolution today. This helps to prevent infiltration and sabotage by reactionary forces, and it also helps to ensure that politics remains firmly in command. For anyone, for example, who studied the Irish Revolution, that hasn't always been the case, unfortunately. There have been many situations where the gun has been in command and politics have not been in command. So I think MLM really helps to put everything back in the right places, if that makes sense. Now, I will say the seeds for most of these things are present. Going back to Marx and Engels, these are just developments on what's already been there. But I would argue that these are qualitative leaps forwards beyond both Marxism or Orthodox Marxism and Marxism-Leninism. And this has been proven, as you said, in the crucibles of actual revolutionary class struggle. That old saying, in the crucible of people's war, as I say, which I think is, I think it's useful to keep in mind, because this is a question that I get asked all the time. Like, why do we see MLM as like a separate stage from ML? And
absolutely.
And it's also, I think you mentioned earlier as well that you had the perspective, which I had for a very long time as well, where we kind of just collapse MLM into ML. And this is tempting because MLM is ML in the sense that because in the sense that Marxism-Leninism is Marxism, Marxism-Leninism-Maoism is Marxism-Leninism, updated for the modern and current conditions of today, and so there is sometimes a little bit of a temptation just to say, well, okay, Marxism-Leninism is the immortal science. That's it. We don't need to go any further than that. All of these developments, I agree with all these things. I agree with mass line. I agree with criticism, self-criticism. I agree with XYZ, concentric construction, the three weapons of the revolution, whatever it might be. But these are all just part of Marxism-Leninism. And, well, you could make the same argument to negate Marxism-Leninism itself, and you could just have this sort of back to Marx approach and just say, well, let's just all be Orthodox Marxists, let's just be, it was all there in Marx and it was all there in Engels anyway, so, back to Marx. Let's just go back there. There's no need to be Marxist-Leninists. But it is important to note that, like, whenever we say like Marxism-Leninism is this immortal science, it's always worth highlighting that the science is, of course, historical materialism, and the philosophy that underpins that science is dialectical materialism. So, Marxism, Leninism, Maoism would then just be the third stage of that science today. Sorry,
exactly.
I went on a big rant there. I apologize.
No. I absolutely agree with most of what you said, and sort of, it's very if science is open-ended and it develops, and so sort of Marxism-Leninism as an immortal science, sort of, well, if Marxism-Leninism is science, then it also means it has to be open to developments, and sort of that also means it has to be open to sort of the universal contributions that sort of the experience of the Chinese Revolution made. So yeah, I absolutely agree. And it's very funny to me because I think this is the first time I've like openly explained sort of my position as MLM. I think most people sort of just assume I'm ML. I tend to, like, in terms of like online, I associate myself like I'm in the sphere sort of ML politics. Like, I think I had a journalist reach out to me a while ago who also reached out to Bay Area, and sort of he was like, they're asking about the rise of tankies and people who defend China. And I was like, am I really considered to be part of that? I didn't respond, obviously, but I found it quite funny. But actually, this is another question. Do you know what happened to Bay Area? I'm quite concerned. I think I think he got doxxed, and now he's like I haven't heard much about him.
Yeah, it's like for all of our political disagreements, he was a nice guy, and I'm sad to see that happened. It seemed like it was quite a serious doxing that occurs. No, I don't know. I just saw the public posts that went up on the Twitter, which I think even his Twitter was made private as well. There hasn't been a
Yeah.
word. There was, I think there was a message at the time that said, you know, keep an eye on the space. We'll try and restore things, but I think a few of them are backed up. I think a few of the videos and stuff like that, and maybe some of the media that was out there is backed up in various different sources. You can probably find some stuff if you're interested there. But no, I'm afraid it seems like Bay was pretty much just doxed off the internet, which is not great.
Damn. Yeah, kind of sucks. I
Yeah,
mean, it's very shitty.
yeah. For all the disagreements, you know, but yeah, it's
Yeah.
shit. It's shit. Okay. Thank you very much. Great. I think we've talked a little bit about MLM now. I just want to take a little look at the questions here. There was a couple of questions. I'm going to do some international solidarity in a moment. I just want to give a little shout out to some things that have happened around the world. I will do a quick. I want to quickly answer a question from Lucha Liberation, who makes fantastic artwork and also fantastic artwork that
Yes.
oh, please, everybody, go support Lucha. Please, it's absolutely phenomenal work that's being created. Uh,
Absolutely.
great internationalism there. You know, supporting struggles from all over the world. Um, and Lucha asks, is Maoism a big current in the Irish national liberation struggle? It's growing. It's a massively growing current right now. I can't say it's the dominant current. What I will say is that in terms of the Irish national liberation struggle, and I have to sort of cordon off what's often commonly thought of as the Irish national liberation struggle. I'm not talking about the reformists. I'm not talking about people who are trying to, you know, bring about revolution through the ballot box, because that's a red herring. That's never going to happen. It's an absolute, it's a bourgeois myth, you know. And so sometimes people get misled into believing that organizations that were, for example, very revolutionary in the 1970s and 1980s are still the same as they were back then. But no, that's not true. Unfortunately, it's one of those cases where through struggle, something has become its opposite. Dialectics. Unfortunately, the revolutionaries have become the reformists, and so I'm not talking about them. What I am talking about is revolutionary socialist Republicans today. Um, there's a general orientation towards some form of revolutionary Marxism. A lot of people love Che, all that sort of stuff. It's maybe not quite as clear. A lot of the people in the revolutionary socialist Republican movement, some of the organizations are kind of big tent revolutionary socialists and Republicans. They are now. The positive thing is that they are firmly socialist in their outlook and in their orientation. But whether that's, you know, adhering to, for example, Marxism and Maoism, well, that's a line struggle that's going to keep on going, and that is ongoing at the moment, you know. But look, that shouldn't be an issue. I mean, these organizations should be supported on the basis of national liberation alone. It's an oppressed nation taking on imperialism. So I mean, that's we should be supporting these movements anyway on that basis, even if they're not 100% aligned with you in terms of your particular or our particular positions on MLM. You know. So I'd say that it's a massively growing movement. MLM is a really rapidly growing movement in the Irish national liberation struggle, but it's not the dominant current right now. Although thankfully, socialist republicanism is the dominant current in the Irish national liberation struggle, even though it hasn't always been historically. There were moments in the Irish national liberation struggle where they kind of put socialism to the side, and it just really wasn't treated as a big issue. It was kind of treated as an optional extra, you know. But now it's very firmly socialist republicanism. There's no if buts or maybes about that, thankfully. So at least there's that. Okay, there's another question here from the Gatheist for you, Spooky. The Gatheist,
Sure.
they ask, Spooky Scary Socialist, what happened to your Stalin video? You were talking about your Stalin video a little bit earlier. I'm not sure if you want to
Yes.
talk
Okay.
about that.
No, I'll talk about it. First of all, I do not have any. This is something I want to clarify up first. I do not have any disagreements with anything I said in that video. I think everything I said in that video is accurate, and I would not say I like fundamentally disagree with anything I made in that video. I pretty much like think everything I said in the video was correct. The reason I took it down is because as a creator, it's just very, very embarrassing, and it was the video was sort of defanged. Sort of, it was my first full length video, and so I used a lot of copyrighted music, and so I had to remove that copyrighted music. So that meant removing huge sections of like the video. So like it completely shifted my original tone, and like it honestly like came off as very shoddy when I removed the copyrighted music.
Mm.
And sort of the workmanship of the video, I mean, like as an animator, I look back on it and I cringe. I mean, like the backgrounds, non-existent. It was all white backgrounds, and it's like that's very lazy. As well, the lip sync. Oh my god, I the lip sync slides off in the middle of the video, and like most people don't notice. I haven't had a single comment noting the
I didn't.
terribleness of the lip sync, but oh my god, I watched that and I'm like, this is so embarrassing. Because when you export animations, actually audio actually gets off sync, and so in post you actually have to put it back together every couple every
Okay.
second or so you have to put it back together. And so the workmanship of the video is why I took it down as well. I want to get rid of copyrighted music, so I've been saying for a while that I want to re-upload it and bring it back soon, and I probably will. I It's just I don't like revisiting old videos. It's just very cringy for creators. But at the end of January, I've made a schedule for myself. At the end of January, I'll re-upload it. There'll be backgrounds. The lip sync will be fixed. I'll add some addendums. I'll try to clarify certain things that people were commenting. Like, for example, people were confused on the Soviet archives, and this is a bit of a tangent. Sorry, Paul, but sort of people assumed that this people assumed that the Soviet archives were sort of this propaganda that the Soviet state put out, and I don't think I made it clear enough in the video that the Soviet archives were sort of these like documents that were kept confidential and were only released after the fall of the Soviet Union. So when I sort of was discussing the Soviet archives, I was sort of assuming people like already knew that, but like people were like confused. They were saying, why are you using propaganda numbers? And Soviet archives weren't the propaganda numbers. They were the numbers that the Soviet state was operating with. It was the numbers that were kept confidential. And so in this new video, I'm going to add some, like informational addendums. I'm going to fix the, aesthetics, make it prettier, as well as change some of the music so it doesn't get like copyright striked. But so yeah, that's pretty much where the video is. Just look out for it at the end of January.
I'm gonna keep my eyes peeled and looking forward to that. Yeah, I've had many videos that have been privated and hoping to return to at some point, but I think every YouTuber has that, like the first maybe third of their see I really tried hard to pronounce that correctly there. Third of their channel is just like privated as soon as they get in any way established.
Oh yeah,
because you just look back,
absolutely,
you cringe so hard. It's so hard. Oh god, yeah, I had one in particular where it was dealing with the question of, was the IRA left wing, and just out of some complete oversight, I was talking about the French Revolution, and I was like, oh yes, this is the left wing, and they were all egalitarian, blah blah blah. Like I just totally I didn't situate that at all within regard to like the bourgeoisie and the proletariat and all. It was just really cringe and really silly, and yeah, I don't know. Anyway, so I was like, all right, I'm gonna remake this and not fuck that up so much, and also not show my face because. Jesus Christ.
Face reveal? Can we get a face reveal, Paul?
I'm slowly de-revealing my face. That's what I'm doing at the moment. Even my animation is slowly becoming more and more covered up. A little mask has appeared on my face of the cartoon version of me.
Oh no, you're a master.
I'm gonna turn into like a ninja. I'm gonna go full Bay in the next couple of months. Yeah.
Voice changer.
Voice changer. I need to get the modulator. Yeah, that'll really keep things secure moving forward. Okay, great. I think we've answered those enough. I just want to do a quick note of solidarity. I do think that, especially for people who are like revolutionary Marxists or who are interested in revolutionary Marxism, I think it's always good practice for us to maybe give shout outs to real world revolutionary struggles that are going on at the moment. If we have a few people here, I think it's quite useful to highlight these things that maybe people weren't aware of. And so there's just maybe 4 or 5 little quick notes that I want to give in terms of points of solidarity to struggles that are going on right now in the world. So I just want to quickly note, of course, that December 26th it marks Chairman Mao Zedong's 128th birthday. So of course, happy birthday to the chairman. And of course, very same day, December 26th, have to send some revolutionary solidarity to the Communist Party of the Philippines, which celebrated its 53rd birthday on the 26th of December. So all victory to the new democratic revolution. On the same note, I want to send solidarity too to the revolutionary communist struggles in India, Turkey, Peru, and Brazil. And I have to say as well, I note with particular sadness the passing of Comrade Pele, a peasant from Bahia, and one of the founders of the LCP in Rondonia, I can never pronounce that correctly, which is a place in Brazil. And that happened on December 8th, 2021. So unfortunately, that happened. LCP, people should really check out the League of Poor Peasants, the LCP. I can't pronounce it in Portuguese, but it's LCP. If you look it up, you'll find a lot of really, really good stuff and inspiring stuff in terms of the peasant struggle that's going on there at the moment. In Ireland as well, I also want to offer a little bit of support and solidarity with the prisoners of war who fought for national liberation and socialism. The Republican prisoners who remain locked up today across the island. That's still a thing. This month's December is what we call POW month, prisoners of war month, and so we try to, I suppose, just draw attention to the fact that there are still political prisoners here, and if people are interested, I think it would be really useful and really helpful for people maybe to send them some letters. It really livens up their day and really makes things a lot better. If people are interested in sending letters to these comrades who've fought for national liberation and socialism, who've really, put their lives on the line for this, they can join a Discord server, a new Discord server that was set up by Anti-Imperialist Action Ireland. This is for supporters of the national liberation and socialist, the struggle for national liberation and socialism in Ireland. On the server, you're going to find loads of stuff. You're going to find all kinds of educational resources, Republican stuff, socialist stuff, general socialist stuff, but also specifically with regard to the Irish revolutionary struggle. And on that, there's a tab with prisoner of war information, which pretty much gives like a full rundown on how you can contact these prisoners of war, how you can send them letters, how you can actually support them and offer some solidarity with them. So I definitely recommend comrades check that out. And you'll find a link to that Discord server in the description box below for anyone who's interested. As well, if you're interested in supporting the movement for socialist revolution and for national liberation in Ireland, you can also take an active part on that server. You can become an active supporter. Just ask the mods on the server about that, and you'll be given a lot of support and shown ways that you can actually really take an active role in supporting the movement, no matter where you're from. So even if you're on the other side of the world, if you're from, I don't know, Japan or India or wherever in America or whatever it might be, you can still play a role in supporting the movement. And that server might be a good way of showing you and showing you ways that you can really materially affect the movement here in Ireland. So those are just some quick notes of solidarity that I wanted to address today. I'm not sure, Spooky, did you want to do any notes of solidarity? It's a really random question. I know it's not something that people often do on these kinds of streams, but was there any solidarity you wanted to give to anyone? Did you want to give a little shout out to the Philippines? Did you want to give a shout out to, hell, why not, other content creators or other people that you want to recommend people give a little bit of love to?
I think you covered everything. You already mentioned the anniversary of the Communist Party of the Philippines. But like in terms of like channels, I really like, I mean, obviously your channel, it's a fantastic channel.
Come on.
It's Socialist 101, chef's kiss. But, I mean, honestly, if I had to name channels and like people that I look up to and organizations I looked up to, like I would be here forever. Like pretty much every interaction I've had with like communist YouTubers has been very positive, as well as their content is very good. Like, I really like, Hakeem, Ugopnik, Second Thought, like pretty much everyone on communist YouTube. I mean, just check them out. I would channel box them all, but I'm not sure there's enough space. But like in particular, just recently, I guess that comes off the top of my head. I mean, Space Babies.
Amazing.
He recently made that documentary on China's socialist development.
Phenomenal.
Oh, fantastic! I think you had a voice in there, Paul, didn't you?
Yeah, one or two places, yeah, maybe.
but and his music, brilliant.
I still can't believe that he does the music.
I
for
recommend.
It's wild how much work that would
so
take.
Good. Absolutely, honestly, look up to him. I would also recommend. Shout out to Esperanza. So Esperanza, I think you had her on to talk about proletarian feminism a couple months ago.
Love Esperanza.
But like her work on sex work and proletarian feminism is like, it's so theoretically like dense and interesting. And I read it and it's like, I felt myself like in terms of consciousness qualitatively leaping into like this is what this means. Like she sheds so much light on these questions. So check out her work and also check out that stream. I think I reviewed it a little bit here, but yeah, just if check out communist YouTube in general. I mean, pretty much everyone here, no matter what tendency they have, is like pretty good, and I love everyone on here. Honestly, it's been very positive.
I love the positivity that you have. I've grown so cynical. I've become this old Scrooge kind of figure on YouTube. It's terrible. These fucking streamers on my stream. Let me tell you about my streaming's terrible.
Oh no, are you going to become the next Bosch?
Oh no, don't. Oh my god, I can't believe you even suggested that.
Yes, Bosch. Start a
Cursed.
Twitch channel.
Oh, never. That's absolutely cursed. I will never ever become another Vosh. I can't. No, I can't. I did stream for a little while, but no, I can't. I do every once in a while.
Oh, okay.
If there's someone nice, if there's someone cool who I want to talk to, then yeah, we can do a little stream. But I think that when you're doing it like every day, and it becomes like your whole life, and your whole life becomes cultivating these parasocial relationships with your audiences who you're reliant on for money, it can get pretty toxic, and you can end up telling people just what they want to hear and what will make you the most money, and I think it can be a pretty unprincipled and very liberal environment, unfortunately, in many cases.
Yes, absolutely agreed.
Yeah. Okay, cool. So let's push forward with a few more questions and dive into I suppose some of the main topics of conversation that we're going to be discussing today. We've both seen the rise of this supposedly socially conservative communism, particularly on social media over the past year or so. So what are your thoughts on this particular phenomenon?
So this is actually quite interesting. So I actually wasn't very much aware of socially conservative communism because like I came into communism through queer politics. And so like I mostly surrounded myself with people who were already very like not socially conservative. And like a couple months ago I had this conversation with a couple TikTok teens, couple communist TikTok teens. And like they were talking about the problems of like socially conservative communists. I was like, what? What are you talking about? And so like social conservatism and communism like has always been a big thing. So like I think there are like two main components. I haven't done a lot of like formal research, but like in general there are two main types. So like first of all, there are communists that come from a lot of former communist countries like Eastern Europe and in Russia. And a lot of the communists from these areas tend to be very socially conservative. And sort of I mean, there's a lot of reasons for that social conservatism. So, I mean, prior to the revolution, Russia was just a very backwards country. Like it was semi-feudal. Like it had abolished serfdom, but there were still remnants of feudalism. There's religious orthodoxy dominating it, and sort of with the modernizing reforms of Peter the Great, sort of you had these, criminalization of homosexuality and the domination of sort of the czar. And sort of what's very important, as communists to note is that the Russian Revolution sort of immediately like reversed like sort of the oppression against women and the oppression against homosexuals. So like a couple months or weeks into the revolution, they legalized divorce, abortion, they decriminalized homosexuality, they threw out the old Tsar's legal codes. And I think a common misconception that I've seen thrown around is that the revolutionaries in Russia weren't consciously pro-gay. Like they only threw out the codes, and anti-gay laws were just thrown out sort of as a consequence of that, but they weren't consciously pro-gay. And so that's I disagree with that assessment. I think that's like untrue. So like I think the Russian legal code or the Soviet legal code was written in 22 and 1926, and both times they actually continued the decriminalization of sort of homosexuality. And sort of Russian scientists often worked with the German homosexual emancipation movement, and sort of they were very much influenced by sort of the gay politics that was going on in Germany. So I think I disagree with the assessment that sort of the Soviets weren't like consciously adopting sort of a queer liberationist politics, and I think they were pretty consciously doing that. And so like this leads to the question sort of where's the backslide, right? Why are these countries so socially conservative now? And the backslide happened around 32, 33. So you had the criminalization of homosexuality in that era, and then the criminalization of abortion in 36. And sort of there are many reasons for that. Sort of, capitalist encirclement is a obvious one. So with capitalist encirclement, you sort of have the rise of conscription and a masculine military culture, and sort of as well fascism came about, and sort of there was a lot of gay baiting against fascists. So there were like some of the top fascist leaderships happened to be gay, and so people were like, oh, if you're gay, you must be a fascist as well.
Wow.
So there are many reasons for that, and so like important thing to note is that this social conservatism that arose in the Soviet Union wasn't like a result of the revolution advancing. It was a result of the revolution sort of facing and struggling against these reactionary forces, and often being forced to concede and even go backwards in some ways. So the essence of communism isn't social conservatism. Social conservatism merely arose as a result of the struggle against sort of reaction,
That's
and so
actually that's.
that's sort of yeah.
Oh,
I'm
sorry.
sorry.
Excuse me. I'm sorry.
Yeah, no, continue.
Well, I just want to say something that really struck me is that this is a reflex of the left, I suppose, defining its politics against the right. This issue of uh, not using the historical materialist method of understanding these phenomena and how they arose historically in relation to class society and struggles over the course of class society, but instead saying, well, the fascists are saying this, so we must be the opposite, which I think is some. I think it's, although very well-meaning, and probably very progressive if you're like a liberal, or if you're in that sort of centrist space and you're starting to move towards the left, and you're mostly just defining your politics against the right. You're just the opposite of the right. Now, of course, that can cause, there are many pitfalls to that. For example, not supporting national liberation struggles because you're equating the nationalism of the oppressed with the nationalism of the oppressor, and you just have this idea that fascists are all nationalists and all forms of nationalism are horrifically oppressive and terribly bad. But it really does show the limitations of our politics being defined by our enemies. We need to subject absolutely everything to historical materialist analysis. And another thing that really struck me as well when you were talking is how the criminalization of homosexuality and abortion almost like dominoes fell together, and I think this really emphasizes the fact that there is a dual pronged oppression of patriarchy. These are both fundamentally linked to patriarchy and how patriarchy is developed within class society itself. So I think these are really interesting points that you brought out. And I'm sorry for cutting you off there. I know you're gonna. I think we're gonna bring it up to a more modern dimension now, but I just had to interject like that. I'm sorry.
No. That was very good insight that you provided. And like after the Soviet Union fell, sort of you had conditions that sort of obviously were very bad. I detail it in my debunking video. And so sort of with the degrading of conditions, sort of, you obviously have the coming back of reaction. And sort of that's why a lot of communists, specifically in like the former Soviet sphere, tend to be, somewhat socially conservative. But they're actually, that's not the only sort of socially conservative communism that's been rising up
Oof,
recently. So
we're gonna get into it.
there's sort of there's modern opportunism. So if you've been on the left for a while, I mean, there's always been this strain of anti-idpol communists,
Mm.
whole sort of me based. And more recently, you've seen the rise of like patriotic socialism and family values oriented socialism, sort of headed by a certain segment of the left. And so that can sort of all be under the umbrella of like a kind of socially conservative communism. And so, what are my thoughts on these trends? Well, they're very much defined by sort of a tailism. Right,
Mm.
sort of they tail the most backwards elements of the masses. Sort of they say, the masses are patriotic and the masses, are family oriented, so we must tail them. And they're not sort of distinguishing that the masses are not sort of one sort of homogenous group, but composed of sort of many different elements. You have the advanced, the backwards, and sort of the middle. And sort of the job of communists is not to sort of court the backwards elements and sort of tail them. It's to advance with the advanced elements. And sort of that's the problem sort of with modern socially conservative opportunism. It's sort of very much based on sort of short-sighted, we'll be popular if we talk about family values. And like, no, it's just taylism. I mean, like read Lenin.
Yeah, it really is. It really is, and it totally negates the idea of elevating the backwards where you can. Of course, we elevate the intermediate masses, and then we elevate where we can. We elevate the backwards masses, but unfortunately, there are some who are so reactionary and so harmful to the movement that it's really only appropriate to isolate these kinds of people and try to limit the damage that they can do rather than trying to rally behind the kinds of movements that they're proposing, which is a massive problem. As you said, it's taylism. It's just it's textbook taylism, you know, and
Yes.
completely unprincipled, completely unprincipled, completely undialectical, completely ahistorical. It's failing to take into account that all of these things that people take for granted, like the patriotism, like family values, all this sort of stuff, these are all superstructural elements that have been thrown up by class society. So you can't really say that you want to end class society while holding on to these superstructural elements of class society, because, you know, of course, as we know, the base and superstructure influence each other in a circular pattern. Now, of course, in the final instance, it is the base that determines the superstructure, but only in the final instance, as Engels was very keen to point out. But there is still that pressure, and so if you maintain these superstructural elements of rigidly, dogmatically holding on to family values, which, let's be honest, is very often just used as as pretty much just a, how we say it, like a dog whistle for anti-LGBT plus politics. You know, you can't really
Hmm.
hold on. You just can't really hold on to that if you want to get towards classless society. It doesn't make sense. You know, you need to understand what the family is, what the modern nuclear family is, where that comes from, how it developed, and of course it's Engels who really shines a light on where these things come from and how this particular form of family has come into being with the rise of really during the transition period from pre-class society, what Engels referred to as, I believe it was, he called it savagery, and then there was the period of barbarism in between, and then there was the period of civilization, and civilization was class society, and so this occurred in the transitional stage, which was barbarism. And at this point, you start to see pairing marriages, you start to see a division of labor, you start to see the accumulation of private property, and that requires intergenerational wealth transfer. And of course, so this necessitates pairing marriages, a formalization of the monogamous family unit so as to secure inheritance along patrilineal family lines. And so anything outside of the traditional family unit was deemed as unacceptable, you know. So people could no longer be what we would now today call queer or LGBT plus or whatever. I'm putting a little asterisk there and saying these terms didn't exist
Hmm.
back then, of course. but you know, these were really this monogamous family unit, the man, the woman, the children, etc., and so on and so forth. That was very much determined by the accumulation of private property and uh, the development of capitalism over many centuries. And, well, maybe not the development of capitalism, certainly the development of slave society, then feudalism, and then getting to capitalism later on, at a later stage, you know. So if you don't apply this historical materialist analysis to these questions, you just end up tailing the masses. You say, what's popular? I'll just go there. I'll just follow them, and then I suppose I'll just try and smuggle in or Trojan horse in maybe some socialistic politics within that. But again, this isn't. This is just kind of this is just a really a tailist form of populism, and it's certainly not a principled Marxist analysis. And people really shouldn't be supporting this kind of thing, you know.
Absolutely.
So yeah, and also the anti-Idpol thing as well. You know, I used to actually I remember one video where like I criticized the whole like the obsession with like wokeness and stuff like that from the left, and
Hmm.
I realized very quickly after that this very this is a legitimate criticism, because of course the liberals use things like wokeness as a way of how can we say covering up extremely reactionary positions, you know. And I think we'll probably
Hmm.
talk a little bit more about this. We're going to talk about things like pinkwashing and stuff like that, you know. But they use this kind of stuff to really mask some horrifically reactionary things that are happening. And so, you know, I would have criticized that from the left, and it became very clear that very quickly it became very clear that people in the similar space to me, when I was saying that sort of stuff, who were like, yeah, great, we appreciate this, yeah, fuck these wokesters, whatever, Well, they actually weren't criticizing it from the left; they were criticizing it from the right. They weren't at all.
Yeah.
So, and so the same thing happens with the anti-IDPO things because look, Marxism, historical materialism, honestly, it is not identity politics. It's not. It's class politics. It's class politics, and we're talking about the base rather than superstructure. It's not that. But this whole anti-IDPO obsession is too often just used as a way of attacking pretty much reinforcing patriarchy is one of the big things, tacitly reinforcing white supremacy and other modes of oppression that have been thrown up by class society. Do you know what I mean?
Yes, yes, absolutely agreed.
Yeah. Actually, and leading on to that, I think that'll lead quite well into the next question because I think that you have a lot to say about this, but I think it's probably going to come out in the next question that we're going to be talking about. So, the next question that we had was that modern capitalism often uses the aesthetic of LGBT liberation to sell more products through pinkwashing as well as excusing imperialist actions. So, could you tell us a little bit about what is pinkwashing and how should communists respond to it?
Okay, so pinkwashing is basically sort of, I mean, as you already said, it's sort of these huge corporations as well as states sort of using the aesthetics of queer liberation to really disguise sort of their obviously exploitative and imperialistic actions. So, a go-to example that sort of comes to mind is Israel. So, like
Yeah.
over the summer, you had sort of Israel continuing its basically genocidal actions against Palestine. And what you'd have is, you'd have these liberals come up and be like, well, Israel, treats gay people well. Israel is socially progressive and it's great. It's great for gay people. While Palestine, like if you're gay, you would be stoned in Palestine. Palestine is backwards. They're basically calling Palestine like a backwards shithole is what they're calling it. And
Mm.
so pinkwashing sort of is painting over the genocidal actions of like Israel and sort of saying, well, Israel treats gay people okay, so that means their genocidal actions against the Palestinians and against Palestinian self determination is okay. And sort of that's sort of how pinkwashing operates. Now, of course, before I go on, I mean, this narrative is obviously incorrect. So, first of all, a lot of homophobia within Palestinian culture came through British colonialism. Israel itself has had to manufacture this image through sort of a campaign called Brand Israel, and sort of as well, Israel, like Israelis, when they knock down and destroy Palestinian homes and shoot Palestinian people, they don't go around asking, hey, what's your sexuality? And if you're gay, you can, come here and be happy. Like, no, it's obviously bullshit. I mean, Israel does not give a shit about gay people, does not give a shit about queer Palestinian gay people. So, like, obviously, pinkwashing in like that context is obviously just bullshit.
Mm.
And so, sort of pinkwashing, it's very sort of it's a real problem, and sort of how communists should respond to it is especially, I think it's the duty of queer communists to respond to that. So, in response to sort of the pinkwashing of Israel, I think queer communists it's really in our ball court to like expose that for the bullshit it is, right? Israel does not give a shit about gay people. It's a violent settler colonial apartheid project. And we ought to sort of queer people ought to sort of expose that pinkwashing for what it is. And sort
Mm.
of, I think sort of that shows an important place for queer people in sort of the communist movement, to sort of expose a lot of this pinkwashing and sort of homo nationalism, which is sort of how homosexuality is tied to sort of nationalistic projects, and sort of combat that. And as well, I also think sort of pinkwashing is very interesting because like it really shows that well, there are many ways to take this, but first of all, sort of the result of pinkwashing has been that a lot of people are very understandably suspicious of queer liberation politics. So, like, if you're from like a colonized country and you're being, pinkwashed, and sort of violent actions against your country are being pinkwashed, sort of, in the old days it was, think of the women, but today it's think of the women and the gays. And so it's like obviously imperialists don't give a shit about women or gay people. If they did, they wouldn't be dropping bombs on their heads.
Exactly.
So
Yeah.
yeah.
100%.
So sort of there's an understandable suspicion in some areas, but also it's a suspicion that is unfounded, right? I mean, capitalism will co-opt anything, right? I mean, like just because capitalism sells Che Guevara t-shirts, does that mean we should throw away like Che and the Cuban Revolution? Yeah, like they sell Karl Marx books and Engels books. Does that mean we ought to throw away the theory of Karl Marx and Engels? Like, no, not necessarily. So I mean, capitalism will co-opt anything as long as it's okay. And sort of the duty of queer communists is to sort of not be that, right? Refuse to be co-opted, right? Just expose
Mm.
that shit for what it is. And I think that's sort of how a communist should respond to pinkwashing.
Mm, really well put there. I love that. I'm reminded of the old statement that the capitalists will sell us the rope with which we will. I'm not going to finish that, actually, because I think I'll get pulled off YouTube if I do. But it's a very famous Lenin quote. Hangers. And anyway. Really important point. Actually, when you mentioned this, the first thing first that came to mind is Palestine and how it's presented as this beacon of progress amidst this backward, I don't know, barbaric, this horrific
Yeah. Yeah.
Euro-American settler centric mindset, and the rest of the world are barbarians, and we've got all these progressive values and great, and meanwhile we're doing the most horrific genocidal settler colonial acts imaginable, really just at the most horrific reactionary stuff. At a much smaller level, we saw something, this same weaponization happening. It's not like pink money or pink capitalism or anything like that. But we saw something similar happen in Ireland quite recently, where Irish Republicans were involved in a shootout with the police, and in the crossfire, a young LGBT plus activist got hit, in the crossfire. And in the media, then this was presented as though it was an anti-LGBT plus attack, because the young woman was a lesbian campaigner for LGBT plus rights, and
Mhm.
the media, the British media in particular, used this to smear the entire movement for Irish national liberation as being this reactionary, backward, barbaric thing. And the way they presented it was just, it was as though this person had been like executed, like intentionally, rather than being someone who was accidentally hit in crossfire in a shootout with police, with state forces, in the context of a war of national liberation, and you see how cynically LGBT plus liberation is treated by imperialist media sources to reinforce their own interests, and it was a very dark moment,
Yes.
because so many progressives were like, "Oh my god, how could they do this? These horrific reactionaries," and of course, they think, "Oh, they're these nationalists, they're this, they're that, whatever, terrorists, whatever
Mhm.
fucking word you want to throw on them." But of course, it's an oppressed people, like literally in a literal settler colony that is the 6 counties of the north of Ireland, who are fighting for national liberation. So yeah, but
Mhm.
that context is, funnily enough, that context is left out, just like it is in Israel. You know what I mean? So very interesting.
Yes. Yes.
Very interesting how these things manifest. And also, I see in the chat there, Esperanza, our comrade Esperanza said, I think when we were talking about the last question with regard to the anti-woke lefts, Esperanza said, "I realized the same about the anti-woke, quote, lefts. Once again, people should really read Ajit's new book, where he really breaks down identity politics in a way that is actually critiquing it from the left." Yeah, which is really, really important. Like, if you're going to critique IDPO and stuff like that, you do need to be quite, I think, sensitive and delicate with how you do this, and you really hammer home that you're doing this from the left and not from the right, and that you're not collapsing the criticisms from the left and the right into one thing, which is a big problem that we're seeing at the moment. And also I think that there's an element of obscurantism going on as well, and obfuscation going on, with people using some pretty eclectic and un-Marxist class analyses. You have people going on about how the liberal PMC, this is a big thing, I see it particularly in US spaces now, they're going on about how the liberal PMC are pushing, I don't know, the transgender, whatever the fuck it is. Do you remember a couple of
Oh.
years ago, there was like this joke about it was a meme because of how ridiculous it was, that there was like the gay agenda, and you had this meme, and it's like, they're turning the freaking frogs gay. You know, you hear this kind of stuff. And it's hilarious. But then you have people
Yes.
on the left now who are doing the exact same thing for trans people. Like I've heard people like these TERFs who are, you know, supposedly these people they call themselves self-proclaimed Marxist Leninists, and they're saying that there's like this whole trans agenda, and that it's really just a corporate ploy to sell more products from beauty companies and all this sorts of stuff. And Jesus fucking Christ, they've gone really off the deep end now. I don't know if that's something that you're really hearing where you live. Maybe this is just me as someone who lives in Ireland, besides Turf Island, beside Britain, where you get a lot of that kind of stuff. But it's really horrific. It's really horrific seeing this collapsing of criticisms from the left into just the most blatant reactionary criticisms from the right, if that makes sense, you know?
Yeah. In sort of the U.S. context, sort of where I operate, I mean, there isn't as much transphobia as I would say there's in Britain. Like, Jesus Christ,
It's
you have
just
it bad over there.
it's
Uh,
something else, yeah, something else. Well, actually, but it's a
yep.
mark of the Irish national liberation struggle, where even though there are some pretty reactionary so-called Marxist organizations here, there's not a single organization in Ireland that officially takes like a trans antagonistic line or a queer antagonistic line. Officially, of course, there are still elements. There are still those people who are very influenced by colonialism and who look up to the so-called communists in Britain with these incredibly reactionary positions, and so they adopt them as their own. But for the most part, anyway, the left has mostly rejected all that sort of stuff here, and that is kind of related. A lot of us kind of see that as part of like a national consciousness that separates us from Britain and says, no, we're not you fucking backward reactionary dipshits. We're not interested in that. Get out of here. Fuck off.
uh, but yeah, in the American context, in terms of transphobia, like the transphobia here is, I mean, like the only example that comes to mind is obviously that debacle with I hate to name names, but
Mm.
Caleb Maupin,
Ah,
whenever he sort of was interviewing that
what a
one
Brit.
lady and sort of yes,
It all comes back to
and
Turf
it's, sort of,
Island.
it's the source. And you know, he sort of just lets this transphobia slide. And Americans usually tend to be. Now, I'm speaking in terms of like personal experience. This isn't like a systemic analysis,
Yeah,
but
yeah.
like in my personal experience, Americans usually, if they do have transphobia and like they're leftist, it's usually in sort of like transphobia of just ignorance and letting things slide,
Mm,
and like not really understanding trans issues or not wanting to understand trans issues, and rather than like the explicitly sort of very virulently, violently transphobic stuff that we see in other places of the world.
mm, mm, mm. Well, it's good. It's good that that it's not a dominant trend anyway. Where you were. See,
Well, I mean, I'm saying that as a gay man. Obviously, if you're trans in the United States, you're gonna be like bombarded like with a lot of transphobia. So
yeah.
obviously, I want to leave room and space for a lot of Black and Latino, and Latina trans people who obviously have very different experience for me. And so I
Yeah, of
just want to
course.
put that disclaimer out there. I'm not speaking for everyone in America.
Mm, mm. Absolutely, absolutely. Yeah, well, it might be worth actually doing some sort of streams or videos or something like that about this topic, and maybe hearing some other experiences from people who have directly experienced that at some point. So maybe that's a conversation. Maybe I'll have to put a pin in that and return to that at another stage. But yeah, anyway, it's cool to know that we're definitely on the same page with regard to this question. Leading on from this particular question, do you believe the answer to this is pretty self-evident, but do you believe it's essential for modern communists to support LGBT plus emancipation? Why or why not? Drum roll for a very surprising answer, I'm sure.
Yes. Answer is yes. I'm tempted to just say no and like end the stream and just
Nah,
leave the
fuck it.
call. I'm just playing. But yes, I do think it is essential, like if you're especially on the left today, to support queer emancipation. And so I mean, like I have like a whole list of reasons, sort of, that I've written up sort of over the years. But I'll try to narrow it down and be quick with a lot of them. So like I'm going to begin with a very un-Marxist reason, and sort of, you know, with personal stories. The RCP USA, the Revolutionary Communist Party USA, sort of held a homophobic line for a number of years.
Mm.
And sort of later on, there was this project by a couple of post-Maoists, I think, called the Kasama Project, where they sort of talked about a lot of the problems they had in that organization. And a text that sort of really stood out to me was this text, Out of the Red Closet, I believe. And like the first story there is like the story of Libri, who was this very young woman who was sort of, realizing and coming into her identity as a lesbian. And so she was working in the RCPUSA and sort of, you know, like came out to a lot of her comrades and people she worked with and said, "Hey, I think I might be a lesbian." And sort of, what top leadership in RCPUSA did was, they took her aside and they basically browbeat her, right? They
Mm.
browbeat her with like, I mean, this was like a young woman. She wasn't like very aware and couldn't quote Marxists and Maoists and Lenin texts from heart. And so, they browbeat her with, oh, lesbianism is petite bourgeois individualism, it's
Ugh.
imperialism, blah, blah, this typical nonsense. And as a result, sort of, she was stuffed back into the closet. And she sort of, I mean, it's really heartbreaking. She sort of was forced into sort of a heterosexual relationship
Oh wow.
where she
Jesus.
eventually, she had to stay there for like, well, she stayed there for a bit. And eventually, sort of, she was so like downtrodden by the experience, sort of in the RCPUSA, that she like left communist organizing for a while.
Wow.
And so sort of I think sort of when we talk about, the gay question, right, we really miss out on a lot of like the personal stories, right? Like if you have a wrong line on the gay question, you're going to cause suffering and a lot of suffering. You're
Yeah.
going to demoralize a lot of your rank and file, your cadre. You're going to cause them to go through a lot of unnecessary pain, and they're not going to be able to trust their comrades, right? Wasn't it Mao who said, you have to care for one another? Communists should care for one another, and
Mm.
like it's moralistic, and I know communists should shy away from moralism, but if you uphold a homophobic line, you're causing unnecessary harm, and you're also, and this is the big thing, okay? The RCPUSA's homophobic line was in the middle of the HIV/AIDS crisis, which was sort of this
Oof.
rise of militant gay organizing. You sort of with ACT UP, and you had like all these militant gay people organizing, and the RCPUSA was like just ignoring that. It was saying, gay people, this militant, promising social movement, you're not welcome to sort of the working class movement. And they really, it was a betrayal, and it really is a stain on sort of the history of communist organizing. And so, once again, I mean, the problem was tailism, right? I mean, it's always tailism, tailing and courting the
Yeah.
backwards masses. And if you want a good text, I think the Los Angeles Research Group published a really good text against the RCPUSA towards the scientific analysis of the gay question.
Shout out to Foreign
But
Language Press.
sort of like, yes, they're so good. I have
Mm.
so many books from them. But yes, and so
Fantastic.
sort of like I wanted to start with the personal reasons because that's the most powerful to me. But I mean, like, there's so many different reasons why gay people or why communists should be like support queer liberation. So first of all, I mean, as the Los Angeles Research Group points out, having an incorrect line on sort of one position can bleed into other positions. So for example, if you have a very subjectivist sort of idealistic position on the gay question, so if you're homophobic because you have these irrational sort of subjectivist understandings of what it means to be gay, that's obviously going to bleed into other lines. And I think we did see that to a certain extent in the RCPUSA, sort of degraded into an Avakianite cult. So yeah, incorrect lines tend to bleed over. So if you have an incorrect line on queer liberation, it's probably going to bleed over into other things. Another thing, Lenin also said that communists need to lead and formulate a narrative that touches all aspects of society. And gay people are part of society. So if you want to be a communist, you need to understand and study and incorporate sort of gay liberation within sort of your politics as well. Another key aspect is the queer liberation movement is a key ally of the working class. It's a key possible ally of the working class.
Mm.
I think Huey P. Newton sort of studied that. He said, we need to study and possibly work with the gay liberation movement. And sort of, if you're failing to do that, you're abandoning possible allies of the working class. And so, you're not really doing your duty as a communist. And so there's a lot of other reasons that I could give out, and I could go on forever. But like ultimately, this is what I want to end with. Sort of Leslie Feinberg is sort of this key transgender sort of communist thinker who's been sort of very influential in sort of my personal thinking. And sort of what Z boils it down to is solidarity. So Feinberg wrote this book, Stone Butch Blues, where sort of it's loosely based on Feinberg's experience, sort of, as a communist organizer. And sort of Feinberg talks about the experience of organizing butch lesbians who work in factories, into unions. And sort of, if you sort of the struggles of having to deal with sort of homophobia sort of among workers who sort of harassed a lot of these lesbians sort of on the line, and sort of the struggles of building solidarity. And so sort of the reason communists should support gay liberation is because ultimately gay people, like most people, are workers, and communists should support the workers. And if you want to build class solidarity, you have to work with all segments of the working class, not just the segment that you like, right? It's all segments, including the queer working class. So yeah, I just want to end on that point.
100%. Really, really, really well articulated and concise and straight to the point. I can't emphasize this enough. But particularly, let's start with trans liberation. Like, the fight for trans liberation is the fight for queer emancipation. The fight for queer emancipation is the fight against patriarchy. The fight against patriarchy is the fight against class society itself and the private property upon which it's based. That is to say, this is the fight for stateless, classless, moneyless society. This is the fight for communism, at least properly conceived. That's not to say that everyone who's involved in the queer liberation movement fully understands this and has the full understanding of how queer antagonism developed from a historical materialist perspective. But today, this is how we must understand it, with the benefit of hindsight and with historical materialist analysis. Unfortunately, people are still stuck. Some people are still stuck in, well, what can only be described as kind of 1930s understandings of these questions. But things have developed. We've got new scientific developments which have, how can we say, raised awareness on these issues. As you mentioned, for example, towards an analysis of the gay question, the foreign language press book. There's many different texts which are elucidating this point and adding more clarity to it, adding more clarity to this issue that we just didn't have before. And so it really falls to communists today to correct the errors of the past, and we absolutely need to incorporate all of these into the movement. And it's also like, we have to be honest, LGBT plus people are, in general, don't know how we can describe it as a super politicized group within society. I mean, if you're in like any kind of organization, just look around you, just any kind of left-wing communist organization, whatever it might be, like, you're just gonna find yourself surrounded LGBT plus people, and like, you need to think, like, why is that? What is that a reflection of? Why is that? And I think that is a reflection of the status of LGBT plus people under the current order. I think that the feeling of needing to rise up is how can we say, a subjective reflection, an ideal reflection of the material reality of oppression imposed upon this group by class society itself, particularly under capitalism, but also under feudalism and slave society as well beforehand. So absolutely, this is part and parcel, hand in hand, with the struggle against patriarchy and with the struggle against class society itself. We can't put this question aside. It's not. It's 100%. It is the struggle for communism. It's part of that, and the only way to I suppose pretend that it isn't is to cling to outmoded schools of thought, which would be falling into the trap of dogmatic revisionism, dogmatically clinging onto things that were thought to be correct in 1936 in the Soviet Union, but which have since been proved to be completely incorrect. Do you know what I mean?
Yes, absolutely agreed.
Yeah. So from there then, how should principled communists approach those with reactionary social views? For example, those who do oppose abortion rights and oppose LGBT plus liberation.
Ooh, that's a big question.
Spicy one.
Yes, and I honestly don't have all the answers. That like boils down to, how do you change people's minds? And if in the context of a revolutionary organization, if you're in a communist organization, obviously don't let that slide. Okay,
Definitely
like,
not.
you have to align struggle against that, in all of its manifestations. Struggle against it with your comrades, struggle against it with pretty in the organization itself. I think that's very important. Oppose liberalism, right? Don't let things slide for the sake of keeping peace.
Definitely.
But like, in the context of everyday life, like, it's how do you deal with people with reactionary social views? I mean, that question boils down to, how do you change people's minds? And that's a very personalized question. And I'm curious on Paul's on your perspective. But in my opinion, I think a lot of the way you change people's reactionary social views is very personalized. So like you have, if you know the person well, you should know, what do they respond to, what do they not respond to, and sort of you can use that to your advantage. And sort of there are many different ways. So for me, I feel like a lot of socially reactionary people, they respond very well to personal stories. So like as a queer person, sort of when I sort of came out, sort of the close relationships I had sort of had to change and shift a lot of their perspectives, because now sort of gay people weren't this abstract idea, but it's physically in front of them. As well, if someone just doesn't respond well to personal stories, there's also like just basic science, right? I mean, like you can just talk about sort of the scientific view, sort of showing that gayness is something that's completely natural. It's always existed throughout human history, and that exists in nature as well. So yeah, I mean, if that approach works, it can work as well. And I logic as well. I don't know.
Yeah.
I'm curious on your opinion, Paul. What do you think we should deal with in terms of responding to reactionary social views?
Well, I think there's a very important. It's very important to delineate about who we're talking to when it comes to this question, because you might be talking to, if you're at work, if you're at work and you're in the break room and somebody is cracking sexist jokes or something like that, that's very different from just a worker who hasn't engaged in any kind of political education. Uh, that's very different to someone who's, for example, like leading a communist movement making sexist jokes. Do you know what I mean? So like
Yeah, of
for
course.
for people who are active communists, you need to take an extremely, as you said, combat liberalism. Don't let it slide. You need to be very, very firm and hit it right there and then. For someone who's making a sexist joke in the office, it can suffice to just pull them aside afterwards and say, hey, listen, what you're saying there, maybe that's hurting someone's feelings. Someone overheard it. It's not great, and maybe connecting it to the struggles, depending on the consciousness of what they had. As you said, with people who are quite reactionary, who don't have like a political consciousness, they do tend to be more caught up in personal kinds of issues. So it can be useful to relate that back to some kind of personal issue that you've had. Just you can connect that in any number of ways. Do you know what I mean? Like if they're saying
Hmm.
sexist stuff, and maybe some other form of oppression that they might experience, whatever that might be. Maybe they experience like homophobia, or maybe they experience racism, or they experience ableism, or whatever it might be. You can always relate back and just say, well, how did it make you feel when somebody was saying this, or somebody suggested this thing about you based on this or that or the other. It's more difficult if someone doesn't have any kind of oppression at all. I suppose it's definitely a lot more
Hmm.
difficult when you're talking to the cishet straight white guy about these kinds of things, because there may not be an immediately apparent reference point to sort of connect to that too. Um, but you definitely do need to pull them aside anyway and try to struggle, and definitely do just keep on kind of niggling at them and keep on saying like, hey, look, you don't need it is difficult because you do end up sort of nagging people a lot of time, and you don't want to be a nag. You want to be communists need to be among the people and be one with the people, and that's a surefire way of isolating yourself. But at the same time, we do need to remain principled. Do you know what I mean? And
Yeah, yeah.
we can't just like tolerate someone cracking racist jokes or something like that just because it'll make us more popular, or it'll make people think that communism's cool and everybody can be part of it, and we can't tolerate that sort of stuff. um but so that's when you're dealing with sort of maybe backward sections of the masses. People who are more like intermediate liberals and stuff like that are very receptive. I found the sort of intermediate sections would be very open to these kinds of things. Just pulling them aside, having a little chat with them. Advanced sections, and particularly the most advanced sections in actual organizations, they need to be held to the absolute highest standards. There can be absolutely no tolerance for any form of bigotry or discrimination or anything like that, especially not if they're people who claim to be any kind of leaders of movements, or thought leaders, or online influencers, or whatever the fuck they may be, people who feel they're sort of leading socialism in their context. There's absolutely no space for this kind of stuff, and they need to be called out immediately and challenged immediately. uh, if you have direct lines of communication, send them a direct message, on Twitter or something like that. Just say, hey, look, this is wrong. You can't say that. Or if there are other ways you need to approach it, then obviously deal with it on a case by case basis. if they continue to do so, even after having been challenged, if they take a pig-headed view, and they just say, no, I am undefeated, I am totally correct about absolutely everything, I'm never ever wrong, even when shown the evidence and even when given the chance to rectify their errors, in that case, it's time for complete isolation. I know we often take this whole anti-cancel culture kind of approach, but there are some people who are genuinely sowing misinformation and sowing discord and sowing reaction and very, very harmful into the movement, and they need they need to be timed out. I think if that's the case, you know. So yeah, that's generally how I would always approach these kinds of questions. As always, unite the advanced sections of the masses, elevate the intermediate sections, try to elevate the backward sections, and if you can't, isolate. Isolate is the only thing you can do. And there's different ways, of course, that you can isolate people, and that's gonna depend. Isolate people and isolate organizations, and that's gonna depending on the context that we're talking about. Do you know what I mean? It's very fucking easy to, like, I don't know, cancel someone on Twitter or something like that, but we're not talking about Twitter. Like, we're talking about, like, real world politics, like in organizations. There's also, you need to talk to the people in your organization about how this should be approached. I'm not going to try and prescribe ways for handling internal disputes internally and how you should be approaching those, but there are ways of doing that, and they need to be followed up on. You can't let things slide. You know, you can't. You can't claim to be part of a communist organization. You can't claim to be a communist if you're not striving to be the most advanced part of the most advanced sections of the working class that's guiding it towards revolution. You can't call yourself a communist if you're not willing to at least strive in that direction. You can't. And that needs to be the standard that we hold absolutely everyone to, you know. And I think that also requires quite a bit of humility on our behalves, because that obviously means that I am subject to this level of scrutiny. I should be subjected to that. You know, you should be subjected to that. All of us should be subjected to that same level of scrutiny, you know. And so we need to be open to that. We need to be humble. We need to have a serious sense of humility and not let egos get in the way. And that's very, very difficult in spaces like this. That's very difficult in online spaces, especially if you have, like, media platforms where people are encouraged to be extremely liberal, to pretend like they're absolute know-it-alls. They know absolutely everything about everything at all times, and off the cuff they have the answers to absolutely everything, and they can give you the best hot take on this or that ongoing current affair or whatever it might be, you know. So it's quite difficult, but yeah, like, I need to be held to the same standard, and as does everyone. We all need to be held to the same standard, and criticism and self-criticism are key parts of that, and these can help us all in terms of rectifying the errors of the past and moving forward. And that's how we as communists must deal with these issues, always with a view towards rectification. Isolation is a part of that, generally temporarily, but, you know, for example, the most reactionary elements, probably not temporarily. You know, for example, I don't think anyone would want to put Adolf Hitler into timeout for half an hour and then invite him back into, you know, civil society to do his thing. But of course, these are all proportional, and proportional responses need to be applied everywhere. Do you know what I mean? Those are my thoughts.
Yes,
Those
absolutely.
are my thoughts. What do you think of that? I just ranted for ages.
No, I absolutely agree. You know, it's the work unite with advanced, elevate the intermediary, and elevate, and if not, isolate the backwards elements. I mean, that's I pretty much agree with everything you said there.
Okay, very good, very good. Great. Okay, I didn't say anything too stupid. That's good. I'm happy to hear that anyway. Good. Okay. All right. Great stuff. Let's take a look. I think we've got one big question to finish up on, and then maybe we'll take a couple more Q&As. I'm not sure how much time you have. We've been going for about an hour and a half. Do you have maybe another?
Oh wow.
Yeah, it's been we've been going. Time flies when you're having fun. Do you have another maybe 20 minutes, 20 maybe half an hour? Does that work with you, or?
Yeah, sure. I'm okay with however long this goes. I'm pretty much free for quite a bit for
Oh,
the rest of
great.
the day.
Okay, perfect. Okay, well, comrades in the live chat, go ahead and put your questions in there now. We'll add them to the list, and we can do a little bit more Q&A after this. We're coming to the last question that we have from beforehand, so just make sure to type in at MarxistPod Live, and I'll take a little look, take them down, and we'll address them after this question. Okay, so the last one is now here's an exciting one. I did see during the live stream a few people were asking about where your videos are, what's going on, where's the spooky scary socialist content, when's it coming, what the fuck, come on, and so why don't you go ahead and tell us a little bit about your upcoming projects?
Okay, so I feel like I do need to explain sort of why I haven't been active. I think it's been like a year and a half since my last upload. And I have these bursts of activity and then sometimes I go away. And so I've been I mean, I mentioned this before, but I mean, there's a lot of pressure when your channel is pretty big. I mean,
Mm.
40,000 doesn't sound like a lot in the grand scheme, but that's already like a substantial amount, especially for like an explicitly like communist politics oriented channel.
Oh yeah.
And so for me, I've been spending like a lot of time like reading and trying to educate myself and really trying to make myself sort of worthy, if that makes sense, worthy
Yep.
of like
I know
any
what you
sort
mean.
of attention I get, and sort of that's why I've been gone, as well as a lot of personal things. Sort of you have to sort of struggle with balancing your course load as well as your theory, as well as organizing, as well as all this, and so some things gotta be end up sort of being pushed to the side for a little bit, and that's something that I do think I need to work on, and hopefully I will rectify that with an upload. So in terms of my upcoming projects,
Here we go.
um, okay, so if you have messaged me in the last year and a half since my last video, I have given many different answers on what my upcoming projects are. So I think I mentioned like a year and a half ago, my next video would be something on Lenin's imperialism. And then I tried to get through that project, and I was like, I don't have the motivation. And then after that, I realized a topic I really wanted to do was climate change. So then that was sort of another big project I was working on. But the problem with climate change is that it is such a huge issue
Mm.
that like I originally planned to do like a quick 30-minute video on it, and like with like two sections, and then it expanded to four sections, and then the script expanded to like 60 minutes, and like the research process had these leaps and pauses because you do research, you get a couple words in, a couple hundred words in, and then you just get depressed and you just stop stop doing it for a little bit, and so
Real
the
talk.
research process for that, yes, like over the summer, I watched probably like dozens of climate change documentaries, and God, was it so depressing. Like
Jesus.
I just
Yeah.
had to take a break from this, and so the
Don't know how
climate
much it doesn't.
change project has, yeah, it's kind of stalled out. But as of now, and this may change, so don't quote me on this.
Mm.
My upcoming project, I have like I think I'm a couple thousand words in on a script on the French Revolution. And so, like, I took a class recently on the French Revolution, and it was very interesting. And I thought, hey, I could make a video on this because I think it's very interesting. And so it'll sort of be like, I think the title is "Was the Terror Really That Bad?" And so I'm going to be sort of
Flagged.
defending.
Flagged. You're gonna get the second thought knock on your door from the
Oh
officials.
no! I'm so confused. How did like that's so oof.
I
Second
believe.
thought getting that CIA
I,
knock on his door. Jesus.
yeah, I think he made the video calling the CIA a terrorist organization, and yep, anti-American views. Got a little knock on the door. Yeah, it happens
Hey, that's how
everywhere.
you know you're doing well.
Yeah, yeah.
Yep.
Unfortunately, the price of success.
That's how you know you're doing. That's how you know you're making progress.
Yep,
Um,
making
but
waves.
yes, it'll be about the French Revolution. It'll basically be talking about a lot of what we people know about the French Revolution is just that they chopped heads. Um, it was a lot more complicated than that. Like they think sort of the common perception of the terror is that it's Robespierre went crazy and he just started chopping heads and being paranoid, and sort of obviously, I want to preface this by saying the French Revolution was a bourgeois revolution, so I don't uphold it on like the um, basis that it was bourgeois, but it was a very progressive revolution for its time, and it was, I
Mm.
think, the Marxist historian Saboul called it the most dazzling of the bourgeois revolutions. And I think it's
Appropriate.
interesting to study for that reason. Yep. Lenin studied it. I think like he upheld was it Danton as a key revolutionary to study. And so the interesting thing about the French Revolution is that there are a lot of parallels with the Soviet Union, and obviously there are problems with comparing different revolutionary projects, especially proletarian and bourgeois. But
Mm.
sort of you had this encirclement of the French Revolution after it occurred. Sort of you had sort of the invasions of sort of the reactionary powers of Europe, and then they were dealing with a civil war, and then in the Vendée region, and they were dealing with federalist revolts where certain regions were sort of revolting against the central authority of sort of Paris. And so sort of the terror really was like a response to a lot of these crises. So it wasn't sort of this paranoid response where they were just executing everyone. I believe a majority of the executions in the terror weren't by guillotine. I think only 2,000 or so people were actually executed by guillotine. And like
Only?
the majority were like, yeah, yeah.
Same.
But but yeah, the majority of the deaths in the terror were actually caused by like fighting in these regions, and obviously this paints a very different picture. That doesn't justify the terror, but it paints a very different picture than what we usually see. And like, I mean, there's also just a fundamental misunderstanding of the terror, sort of that comes from a class perspective. So the
Mm.
terror obviously terrified sort of the ruling classes for a long time, and so sort of the Thermidorian reaction, sort of post Robespierre, like to paint the terror as this like unique evil event when it really wasn't, right? The terror wasn't even like the only terror that occurred. So the Jacobin terror killed around 40 to 50,000 people. And sort of, but after the Jacobin terror, there was the White Terror, which was composed of reprisals against Jacobins and sort of against revolutionaries, and that killed pretty much a similar amount. And sort of you don't really hear about the White Terror that followed
Yeah,
the Jacobin Terror because it's
you never
in the
know.
interest of the ruling class, yeah, to paint sort of narratives about that. And so sort of the sort of it follows sort of the vein of my Stalin video. Sort of I want to get across that history is not this, it's not a list of facts that you learned in grade school. History is an active site of class struggle, and so what we learn about history is often is painted and tainted by the ideological class outlook of whoever is sort of interpreting that history. And it's the duty of proletarians not to sort of abandon history, but to take it up and engage with it sort of in the class struggle. So the French Revolution is probably going to be my next project. Once again, I don't know if I'm going to get it done. I don't know when or where. And I didn't mention this before, but like the process of making videos, I don't think I've ever been like open about this, but it is very, 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 very time consuming.
Yeah, it
Like,
is.
like especially when we're dealing with animation. Like I think if I spend a full day working on a video and pure animation alone, there have been days where I get like 15 seconds of like work done. Like
Mm.
just full day of work, 15 seconds done, and that's usually the amount. I usually get 30 to a minute work done, and at best days I get 2 minutes done. But animation is just a very, very time consuming process. So it's also like do I really want to do this?
Big
So
time.
yeah, sorry about
Yeah.
not uploading. Sorry about not uploading. I've just been learning and trying to get through life in general. I mean, I'm sure everyone has had an 2021. So let's hope next year things will be different and we'll get some projects out.
2K22, let's go. Let's go. You made a lot of really, really interesting points. And first, obviously, the time consuming aspect of animation. Jesus Christ, do I know what you mean? I tried doing a little bit of animation with the Socialism 101 project. Just the tiniest little, just a couple of circles appearing on screens and connecting, in terms of explaining dialectics and stuff like that. I thought it was quite important to have some circles
Mhm.
to explain that.
Concentric circle.
Concentric circles, yeah. I thought it was quite useful with when explaining the labor theory of value, in terms of explaining absolute surplus value. I don't want to get into it right now, but in terms of explaining different things, I thought it was useful to have a couple of different squares on the screen. Jesus Christ, it took me about 3 days just to get those, just to animate those. Just in there. Well, I suppose there's also the
uh,
element of like figuring out how to animate because I'm starting from like scratch and trying to learn things from YouTube videos and stuff like that, But yeah, it really takes a very, very long time, and I don't think people realize how long it takes. I don't know how people like second thought pump out videos like once a week, and that's
oh yeah.
they have kind of minimal animation. I know there's some text animations in those videos and stuff like that, but even at that, I don't know how. The man's a machine. The man's an absolute machine doing that kind of thing. But
Absolutely.
I can only, especially with your videos as well. They're very animation intensive, and I can't even imagine the amount of work. It seems like it would take a couple of years to get through even a moderately lengthed video essay with that kind of animation skills. Very difficult to get the drive and
Yeah, yeah,
motivation to sit down and do that for a full day. You know, so
yeah.
yeah. But
It is what
something.
it is.
It is what it is. But something you said that I thought was very, very interesting was the class perspective with regard to history. That history is always this terrain that's always being fought. And for example, you have revisionists and bourgeois historians who look at for example, the CPP in the Philippines, and they'll just go on. They'll go on and they'll say the stuff about like massacres and all this sort of stuff. And it makes it very, very clear. It makes it very, very clear, like, where they're coming from and why they're saying this. Do you know what I mean? Like, why are they focusing on this? Why? I mean, of course, you can look, of course, at the Bolshevik Revolution. You can look at why are they talking about the Red Terror and not the White Terror. You can talk about Peru. Why are they not? Why are we not talking about why do we always focus on the violence of the Peruvian Communist Party and not the violence of the fascist state? Why? And people don't question that. People just say, "Oh, well, no, that was this." But no, it's the same thing. It's the exact same thing. We're focusing on one to the exclusion of the other, and you need to always consider whose lens is this coming through, whose class lens is this coming through. Do you know what I mean? And I think often when we look at the actual facts, we'll find out that they're very, very, very much tinted in the light of the bourgeoisie. Unfortunately. So I think it's something that really bears reminding people, and especially with regard to the ongoing struggles today, because I've seen people try to write off the struggles in the Philippines and India based on this bourgeois propaganda against them. Do you know what I mean? And we need to push back against that. We need to clarify. We need to fundamentally explain the difference between I suppose people using force for liberation versus reactionary and fascist state violence. They can never be compared to each other. They're fundamentally, one is liberationary and one is fundamentally oppressive. They're diametrically opposed to each other. So I think that's always worth emphasizing that particular fact.
Yeah. I absolutely agree with a lot of what you said, and like a sentiment I see a lot on the left is, like one of my big videos was Stalin. I think I mentioned that before, and I talked about it. And sort of like people keep talking about, why should you talk, and why should you try to inject a proletarian perspective on these long dead revolutionary figures, right? Like most people don't care about like Stalin. Most people don't care about Lenin, right? Like why are you bringing this up? Who cares, right? And for me, I think that's just an excuse to be like opportunist, right? Because once again, history, I want, and like this is, I think, the main thrust that I try to get through to my channel is that history is a battlefield. History is a terrain where class struggle takes place. And if you refuse to sort of engage with and fight these bourgeois narratives that define history, you're abandoning and vacating class struggle. And to abandon and vacate the battlefield of history, it's not a virtue. It's ultimately opportunism and cowardice. And we communists have to be ready to investigate everything and ready to oppose the bourgeois world perspective. And so for me, I think sort of that's the importance of history, as well as the fact that Marxism is a science of history. So if we want to study history, we also need to use history to change and make history. So sort of that's the big theme I want to get through in my channel.
Yeah, really, really, really well put, and a really important message that I hope that comrades who are listening to this will really take to heart. And I also want to say, I see Space Babies in the live chat there. How are you getting on, comrade? Good to see you. Fantastic video. Absolutely adored your most recent video. Everybody who's watching right now, please go and check out Space Babies' new video on China. Absolutely phenomenal stuff. Really, really fantastic. Really fantastic. So we've got a couple of questions there. A couple of questions that have come in the live chats. The first one that I think might be interesting to ask is from Marxism Arism, who said, Paul, are there any organizations in the USA worth joining? Now, maybe you have a better perspective on this. Do you have any thoughts on this? For me, whenever I look to the USA, I tend to read, for example, Tribune of the People. I think it's a really, really useful news source. I don't agree with absolutely every single thing that's said in there, but I think that largely it's a very useful news source, and I think people should support and pay attention to what's going on there. Do you have any thoughts on organizations or movements that are worth getting involved with in the United States?
It really depends on like your local conditions. If you see an organization that's worth joining and you agree with their politics, I mean, by all means, just join it. But in terms of like national organizations and all that, I really don't have anything to say. It's like sadly the United States has like a dearth of like really good organizations that would be happy to sort of endorse. Like each of them has their own little problems that makes me go, sort of, like CPUSA. I mean, like God bless the people who are members of the CPUSA, but it's no, it's just thoroughly not. It's thoroughly revisionist.
Yeah,
Like, I mean,
yeah.
they're pretty shit on the national question.
Mm.
PCUSA. I mean, I hate to engage in slander, but PCUSA. I mean,
The social
it also has
patriotism
its
thing,
own.
that really
I
was
mean,
very off-putting that I saw recently.
yeah. I mean
I think
that
they said that
that
we accept social patriots or something like that in response to that whole discourse, and man, that was disappointing.
yeah. Um, and they've had their own, sexual abuse allegation. I think in the Danky
Miscellany,
video, he talks
yeah,
about that.
yeah, yeah,
Yeah, so it's like same with PSL. They also there's a
yeah,
weird amount of like, I mean, since we're on the topic of sexuality, like, if you don't take seriously the questions of gender liberation and sexual liberation seriously, I mean, you're going to end up with organizations that like have to struggle and deal with like sexual abuse
big time,
scandals,
yeah,
and so like that really shows the importance, especially of like dealing with these questions.
yeah,
And like
absolutely,
pretty much most organizations do this. Yeah, it's like RCP USA as well. I mean, that's mostly an Avakianite cult. Are they even operative today? I'm not sure. And it's like
yeah,
there
I'm
are
not
a
sure.
couple organizations. Yeah, I don't know. I think they are. I think they're running on fumes. So it really just depends on your personal outlook. I mean, look at whose politics you agree with, and try to join them, and also try to develop your own consciousness.
Mm.
Sadly, the Maoist movement in the United States is not as advanced as you would like it to be.
Mm.
But just try to navigate that on your own.
Yeah, I will say on the mouse movement, there are things that you can do even if you don't agree with the mouse. Like for example, I would be interested if I was in the US. I would probably be investigating the CPUSA. I'd probably be checking out them and seeing what's going on there. If not them, maybe you could look into, for example, supporting the movement in the Philippines. There's, for example, supporting the National Democratic Revolution in the Philippines. I believe there's chapters of Anak Bayan in the USA across in a few different states, stuff like that. So you can always help out in that regard as well. So there are things that you can do. It's not like you're helpless. There's always many things you can do. Especially if you have access to a good stable internet connection. There really is a lot that can be done. And hey, as I said earlier, if you want to help out with other revolutionary movements, like in the Philippines, if you want to help out with the revolutionary movement here in Ireland, then please, by all means, get in touch. Join the Socialist Republican server, as linked below in the description box. Please, any skills that you have, they can be used. There's many things that you can do to help support the movement online today. That's not to say politics should just be online, because of course online stuff can only ever amplify a revolution that's actually occurring on the ground. But it can be used to amplify revolutions that are happening on the ground. It can be used to amplify what's going on in the Philippines. It can be used to amplify the Irish Revolution. It can be used to amplify what's going on in India. You know what I mean? It can be used to that benefit. And there's many ways that comrades can contribute, whether they're good at making art, for example, like Lucha Liberation or Young Black Maoists. There's a few different people making incredible arts that really supports. It really shows a lot of international solidarity. Amazing stuff. Maybe you're particularly good at writing. If you're a good writer, then you can write articles in support as a guest writer for various organizations. Maybe you're good with media. Maybe you can make videos, things like that. There's a lot that can be done. It could be just that you're someone who spreads and disseminates the messages of these organizations. For example, when a new article is released by the CPP, you're going to be someone who actually takes on the responsibility of trying to spread that message as far and wide as possible. You'll go onto different subreddits and Discord servers and Facebook and all these different platforms, and you'll do what you can to spread the message and get people talking about this, and really to help these movements to grow. There's a lot that can be done, and this what you're doing should be connected to movements, to real movements. It shouldn't just be individuals, lone wolf individuals, who are just trying to do their own thing. And there is a place for that, of course, but these lone wolf individuals should be at least trying to do what they can to support real world revolutionary struggles where they can and to the best of their abilities, of course. And like yourselves, everyone who's watching this right now probably has good access to an internet connection, maybe has some sort of pull or influence across social media, and you may be able to do a little bit to help out organizations. So yeah, get in touch, get involved. Even if you don't live in the same country, don't be afraid. If you want to support the Filipino revolution, if you want to support the revolution in India, if you want to support the revolution in Ireland, just get in touch and do what you can. If you can't find something on the ground where you are, do you know what I mean? So yeah, those are just some thoughts that I had on it.
Pretty much, yep, agree with all that.
Okay, there was a question from Jess that was posed a little bit earlier. Jess Doya, Marxist Paul, and Spooky. Any tips on how to struggle against? This is a difficult question, actually. Any tips on how to struggle against dogmatic revisionism with your comrades? Spooky, do you have any thoughts on that? Because that's a difficult one. Thinking about struggling against dogmatic revisionism. For me, it's
sorry,
difficult.
continue.
Well, it's difficult helping people to understand what dogmatic revisionism is, and why this is such an issue, and how dogmatic revisionism fundamentally denies historical materialism as a living, breathing, developing science of revolution. It's not a static copy and paste situation. You can't just do the Bolshevik Revolution again and again and again everywhere. In fact, if you look at the Bolshevik Revolution, if you look at what happened in the Bolshevik Revolution, particularly with regards to, like, for example, their military campaign, that wasn't really successfully replicated anywhere. Whereas if you look at protracted People's War, that's been successfully replicated in many different countries. So that has actually a much stronger track record, but it may not have the same historical authenticity that is, or authority that is carried with the weight of the USSR. Unfortunately, there have been people who fall into traps of mechanical thinking with regards to even Lenin's work, for example, particularly with regard to the Vanguard Party itself. The Vanguard Party itself is a very flexible. It's a very flexible organization, and it's really fleshed out by Mao. It's really fleshed out when we consider the concentric construction of, for example, the party at the center, the People's Army at the concentric circle outside of that, and then the United Front at the concentric circle outside of that again. It's really fleshed out. But unfortunately, a lot of people are very rigidly tied to the particular model which is presented in Lenin's What Is to Be Done. But even Lenin, over the course of his own life, proposed different models in accordance with the particular situations of the moment in time within which he found himself. So things are going to manifest differently at different moments in time. We always need to be dialectical. Unfortunately, so many people are stuck to and married to mechanical materialist conceptions of revolution that they really do try to take a copy and paste approach to revolution. And that's not going to work. That's just not going to work, And I suppose emphasizing that people who have tried this copy and paste approach haven't been successful in getting further in revolution than these initial experiments. Sometimes, for example, people call the experiment in Albania the kind of quintessential example of dogmatic revisionism, and fair enough. Albania was a really strong socialist country, particularly up until like the mid-70s. They achieved socialism, and they really stuck to the guns of the original Bolshevik line and did some pretty good stuff. But they weren't able to advance it further because they didn't. They dogmatically stuck to older conceptions of the party and of political economy with regard to socialism that really places maybe a little bit too much emphasis on base and not enough on superstructure, because that's what fundamentally, when it comes to looking at the great proletarian cultural revolution, that's what that was doing. It was addressing all of these elements that had been left over from feudalism and from earlier forms of class society, and they were impeding the development of the economic base. The economic base couldn't progress any further to communism because it was blocked at the level of superstructure. And if you don't recognize that, if you don't recognize that the superstructure itself can become the principal obstacle to communism, then you're never going to get anywhere. You're never going to advance beyond that. You know, you may be able to achieve socialism for a couple of years, and that'd be great. Don't get me wrong. I'd love to see a country that achieved socialism for a couple of years, but it's just gonna backslide. It's gonna fall into the exact same problems that we had before, and it's just gonna backslide back into capitalism. You know. So this is why you do need to have the ongoing cultural revolution to keep carrying it forward all the way to communism. Do you know what I mean? So the task is then, how do you make comrades see that and understand that? Now, most comrades do accept Mao. For me, the answer does lie in Mao himself, like in his teachings himself. But unfortunately, many of Mao's teachings are just written off as ultra-leftism or adventurism or blah, 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 whatever. Whatever slogan you want to use to just write off dealing with this moment in time. But if you don't deal with Mao, fundamentally, you're not going to be able to combat the mechanical errors of the past, at least in my opinion. And that's really what people need to emphasize. People need to engage with Mao, and they need to engage with superstructure. And if they're not doing those things, then they're fundamentally not fulfilling their tasks as communists today in the modern world, particularly when there's such acute struggles going on around things like white supremacy and like patriarchy and so on and so forth today, which are just so patently obvious to everyone, you know. Especially if they're in organizations where people are, for example, where people have experienced the brunt of patriarchy or white supremacist harassment or violence or abuse or whatever it might be. I mean, that in itself should because a lot of the people who are struggling with dogmatic revisionism are in organizations where this has been an issue, and you know, you need to ask, where does that come from? Is that just like a personal failure on behalf of individuals who have engaged in sexually abusive behaviors or just physically abusive behaviors in general, patriarchal abusive behaviors or whatever? No, it's not. That's connected to patriarchy. That's connected to the patriarchal superstructure that exists, you know. And so for people who aren't dealing with superstructure, you're not going to be able to address that fully. Do you know what I mean? So maybe drawing comrades' attention to those issues and how those issues weren't necessarily just personal individual problems, but were actually reflective of political errors, line issues of incomplete politics. Maybe that could help to draw the connections and help people to overcome these dogmatic revisionist errors. I don't know. Those are just some thoughts that I had. I did struggle against these kinds of dogmatic revisionist tendencies historically, and had mixed success in this particular regard. Do you have any thoughts on this, Spooky?
I mean, I think you covered it really well. I mean, I think the important thing is to just do it, to struggle.
Yeah.
You know, don't let dogmatic revisionism slide.
Yeah.
Right? Actually struggle against it and engage in that. And so Paul covered sort of the details about it, but yeah, I think the important thing is to do it, to actually do and engage and struggle, and don't be a liberal and don't let things slide for the sake of peace.
Yeah, absolutely. Totally agree. Okay, very good. Thank you. Now here's a question that I'm hoping that you have a good answer to, because I don't have a great answer to this. It's very ill-informed. And this is from Guy. The user is called Guy. Paul, what are your thoughts on the Stonewall riots and the Combahee River Collective? Do you have any thoughts on this, Spooky? Do you know much about these? I've heard like in pop culture about Stonewall riots and stuff like that. A little bit about the Combahee River Collective. But I do feel like I'm in one of those situations where it's, you know, it's not no investigation, no right to speak, but it's definitely not enough investigation and not enough right to speak.
Yeah. Sadly, I'm not as educated as I would like to be on the Combahee River Collective. I do vaguely know that they introduced or coined the term intersectionalism. And I think there are like some Marxist critiques that could be have of intersectionalism. So heard that sort of the liberal definition of intersectionalism has bastardized the original collective's definition. So I'm not going to comment too much because, you know, no investigation or right to speak. So in terms of the collective, I have, you know, I'm just going to withdraw from
This
any sort of
spooky. This
comment?
is why Maoists don't do streaming. This is why Maoists are shite streamers. We're just like, oh, sorry, no investigation, nowhere to speak. Sorry. To everything. It suddenly all makes sense now. Do you have any
But
thoughts
yeah,
on Stonewall?
yeah. So Stonewall, I believe June 28th, 1969 was sort of when Stonewall happened. So the Stonewall riots, sort of for people who may or may not, who just have a vague understanding of it, they were sort of the police were raiding this bar controlled by the mafia called Stonewall, and sort of unlike previous times, sort of queer people, and specifically sort of oppressed queer people of color, including trans women of color, sort of for the first time stood up against the cops. Well, not for the first time. There were obviously precursors like Compton's Cafeteria, but Stonewall was sort of this lightning strike in the gay liberation movement. So, sort of during the Stonewall riots, what happened was you would have people throwing bricks at cops for the first time, queer people rising up, sort of militantly, for really like it was a very significant moment in gay history. And sort of the Stonewall really is marked as sort of the central beginning point of the gay liberation movement in the United States. And sort of my thoughts on Stonewall is it shows I want to sort of break away from this essentialized idea of queerness, because the people who rioted in Stonewall, they weren't just blanket queer people, right? The people in Stonewall didn't, riot against the police because because they wanted gay marriage. Okay, the people in Stonewall who rioted, these were people who were forced on the streets, people who, had, pretty much no family, people who, sort of queer people of color, trans people of color who otherwise were marginalized by society. And sort of they were rising up as a result of sort of their material conditions. And so I want to emphasize once again that the reason Stonewall was so significant was because it was a rising up of sort of these oppressed segments of society, and not because of any sort of inherent thing within queerness. And so if we're to study queerness, we also have to, once again, we have to place importance on class, the class composition of sort of the Stonewall riots. And I think the gay liberation movement, so Stonewall sort of kicked off the gay liberation movement of the 1970s, and sort of that kind of fizzled out until the HIV/AIDS crisis sort of, put the gay liberation movement back into gear. But another thing I want to emphasize is, one of the reasons the gay liberation movement and a lot of these, militant gay organizations sort of fizzled out was because they didn't pay enough attention to sort of the problem of class. I think Sylvia Rivera was one of the trans women sort of who was in the Stonewall riots, and I believe in the 1970s, sort of she was booed. I mean, like you had this like extremely historically significant member, who was I believe Latina, I believe. And sort of she was booed at sort of a New York Pride Parade when she was trying to sort of get on stage, and she sort of made this very famous speech, "Y'all better quiet down." And sort of she said, I've been beaten, I've been raped, I've suffered for the cause of gay liberation, and everyone here is booing me. And sort of by this time, sort of the gay liberation movement was starting to trend towards sort of the respectable white sort of upper middle class gay people. And so sort of the legacy of like class, the legacy of oppression and marginalized peoples was starting to get ignored. And sort of Sylvia Rivera's speech sort of showcases sort of how a militant gay organization that sort of began opposing the system slowly started to fizzle out as sort of class was ignored. And sort of, that sort of, you had the Gay Liberation Front, which I think fell apart, dissolved in a couple years. And then you had Gay Activist Alliance, which also kind of dissolved in a couple years. And so I want to emphasize once again, the reason Stonewall was so significant was because of its class composition. The reason it was a threat was because of its class composition. And if we ignore class and sort of the gay question, we are going to sort of, find ourselves, maybe we'll have a militant starting point, just like sort of the gay liberation movement in the 1970s, but eventually we'll fizzle out, and we'll trend to sort of reformism and just self-abolition, which is obviously something we should avoid. So I just want to emphasize the importance of class in sort of the riots.
Really, really good points, and I appreciate you explaining that in a lot of detail. I didn't know that, so it's very, very interesting. Fantastic. Thank you very much, Spooky. I appreciate that. There's a couple of other questions. I've gotten to that stage in the stream where it's 2 hours in, and as viewers of streams know, I have a bladder that lasts precisely 2 hours. It holds for precisely 2 hours. That's it. I've got 2 hours, and then that's it. Done. Boom. Need to go to the bathroom. So I do need to either run to the bathroom or wrap things up pretty quickly. How are you doing on time?
I mean, I'm down. It depends on what you really want to do with the stream.
I'd be good for going for like maybe another 15 minutes or something like that.
Yeah, I
There's
think
maybe 15, 20 minutes, something
yeah,
like
yeah.
that. That'd be cool. If it's okay, I might just run to the bathroom real quickly first. Can I? Maybe I can
Yeah,
leave you.
yeah. I
Maybe I can leave you with a question, and you can take that there. There's been a couple of questions in the chat there. For example, Guy just asked quite recently thoughts on May 68, thoughts on Mao Spontex, thought on Jean-Luc Godard's movie La Chinoise. Oh, I haven't watched La Chinoise yet. I've got that on my list of films to
Oh, you
watch.
should. It's an okay movie.
It seems like a lot of fun, and I'd really like to have a little look at that. There's another couple of questions that I've put there into the live chat. There's a question on third worldism, which I'd be interested to discuss because I read a pretty interesting essay about this recently, and I've been really thinking this question through because it's one of those questions where there's a lot of grains of truth, and it can be difficult to parse out the correct position from the incorrect position within that. So, do you want to take one of those questions? Will I go? I'll just be gone for 1 minute, and then we can jump back into it. Does that sound okay?
Sure, yeah. I'll take the question on third worldism because that's a question I think is really interesting.
Okay, great. I'll be back in just 1 minute, and then we can dive into that a little bit more. Fire away.
All right, sounds good. So with third worldism, sort of for a little bit and for a while, I found myself very much attracted to the idea of third worldism. And so, the basic idea of third worldism is that the proletariat of the first world does not exist. That sort of the first world is composed of a labor aristocracy, and that sort of the real revolutionary sort of population is located in the third world. Sort of that's the idea of third worldism, that there is no proletariat in the first world. And it's a very interesting idea, but it has some pitfalls. Like the first pitfall is one, what is the praxis that results from that? Oh, and by the way, I can't see the chat, so if you guys are talking, I can't see anything. But yeah, so the first pitfall is what is the practice that results from third worldism? And the result is nothing much really. I mean, like you have some good praxis, like by the I believe there were Norwegian third worldist bank robbers who robbed banks and sent the money to third world movements, which is really base. But I mean, really, if you're talking about praxis that third worldism produces, I mean, it's pretty lacking in that it doesn't really produce a praxis in that instance. And the best praxis it can produce is very limited in what it can do. As well, fundamentally, although I've sympathized with third worldism for a while, I've ultimately rejected it as incorrect for multiple reasons. So the problem with third worldism is that it conflates exploitation with super exploitation. So the proletariat of the first world may indeed not be super exploited as much as the proletariat of the third world, but that doesn't mean that there is no proletariat in the first world. And so for me, sort of that conflation is sort of why I don't really think third worldism is real. I don't really agree with third worldism, at least today.
Mm. So
what are your thoughts, Paul? Thoughts on third worldism?
I just caught the tail end of what you said there. But I pretty much agree with you. I'm very sympathetic towards third worldism is what I will say, and and that very much comes from like Marx's writings on sort of talking about like how, for example, in Ireland, the definitive blow against the English ruling classes will be dealt in Ireland, and then this is going to open up the pathway. This will sort of send a thunderbolt through the working classes in England, who can then rise up and so on and so forth. And I suppose that does in some way reflect some level the kinds of points that third worldists would emphasize. They'll often talk about, for example, how there's going to be like a global protracted people's war, that's going to encircle the imperialist countries bit by bit. The oppressed nations are going to encircle the imperialist countries, and then I don't think their argument is that there can't be any revolution in the first world as such, as that it's going to happen later. And I think another reason to be sympathetic towards them is that just looking like objectively at For example, like three worlds theory, and looking at like what Mao said about that, and looking at, for example, where the cores and the centers of revolution will be. I mean, he said it would be like Asia, Africa, and Latin America, and that's true. Like objectively, like the revolutionary movements are far more advanced in these places today than they are in anywhere that we would consider first world. Certainly by the Maoist understanding of what first world means. You know, so there is that element that's true, and this element of truth does complicate things a little bit. But fundamentally, what is the basis for revolution? What is the basis for socialism? The basis for socialism, if we go back to Engels, if we go back to socialism, utopian and scientific, the basis for socialism is the social character of production and the contradiction between the social character of production and the private form of appropriation, which is inherent to the capitalist mode of production and manifests in the contradiction, the antagonistic contradiction, it should be said, between the proletariat and the bourgeoisie. And where that exists, the basis for socialism exists. And if that exists, then objectively, there is the basis for socialism. So we can't say that there's no basis for socialism in these first world countries. It's also complicated by, for example, facts like the French Revolution, not the French Revolution, excuse me, the Paris Commune and stuff like that. The French Revolution was not a socialist revolution, but things like, for example, like the Paris Commune and stuff like that. The kinds of arguments that are made, for example, that people in the first world have just such incredibly bourgeoisified lifestyles that everything's so great for them all the time, and that there's no impetus. You know, it's they don't have this situation where they have nothing to lose but their chains. You know, they've got access to video games and to films, and they can go on holidays to different countries and all this, and they can live these sort of labor aristocratic lifestyles, or at least lifestyles that feel that way in many cases, not in all cases, but some people can. But I mean, surely you could make the same argument about people in what we would now call the third world. If you go back to like the mid 1800s and you compare someone in at the time with the Paris Commune in Paris and someone in, for example, like India or something like that, and look at the subjective conditions for them, I mean, certainly there was a difference in the level of comfort that they experienced, but that didn't stop the workers in the Paris Commune from rising up. That didn't stop the revolution, you know. This kind of stuff hasn't actually stopped revolutionary movements before. So I don't really fundamentally buy it. What I think the problem is that they collapse all contradictions into one contradiction. They see the principal contradiction globally as being imperialism and the oppressed nations, which is correct, by the way, which is correct. That is the principal contradiction in the world today, and how that manifests at the national level, at the countrywide level, is of course in imperialist countries, that's between the bourgeoisie and the proletariat, and how it manifests in the oppressed nations is of course directly with imperialism, and that opens up the pathway for national liberation struggles and so on and so forth. So they are correct in that, but there are other contradictions as well. There are other contradictions that emerge alongside that, and a lot of those just seem to be collapsed in on each other. And you have this strange situation where you have people who live in what's called like the first world, and they may be like homeless, or they may be like just really struggling to get by. They're working 12-hour days, they're engaged in productive labor, they're working in factories, they're doing everything, they're meeting all the requirements for being considered objectively proletarian. And you have third worldists who would rather side with a comprador bourgeoisie in the third world than a proletarian in what they call the first world. And to me, that's a massive error. That's totally incorrect. Do you know what I mean? Like, it's because of course there is a bourgeoisie, there is a comprador bourgeoisie in many of the countries which we might call as being so-called neo-colonies, but really semi-colonies today. And we shouldn't necessarily be taking their standpoint. I mean, the struggle isn't country against country as much as it is class against class, and of course that manifests differently with regard to imperialism and the oppressed nations. But to me, it just seems like we're collapsing many different contradictions into one contradiction, which is to me just a little bit of an error in a few different ways. You know, so. Anyway, yeah, those are my scatterbrained thoughts on third worldism right now. I'm not sure if anything in there piqued your interest, or if you wanted to flesh out more. I probably do have a lot more to say about it, but those are the first thoughts that I had.
I think I agree. I agree with most of what you said.
I wonder if the person in the live chat had anything more based on what I said, or if they wanted to respond to that. Um, yeah. Peanut Butter Cup says, Paul, that is the primary contradiction, but the principal one is between imperialist and oppressed countries. Third worldism is really just taking the thesis of imperialism to its conclusion. No, there's no difference between primary and principal contradiction. They're the same thing. Principal and primary are used as synonyms, so I reject that. You can, of course, talk about like principal and primary at different levels, but globally, that is, of course, the principal contradiction and the primary contradiction between imperialism and the oppressed nations. I don't think that third worldism really is just taking the thesis of imperialism to its conclusion. I don't believe that that's an accurate representation of the proletariat in these countries. I mean, because you get all of these things where people are saying that, for example, the proletariat in the first world are benefiting exclusively at the expense of the third world. And there's an element to that. Of course, Lenin wrote about this. He wrote about super exploitation of the third world and how this is used to bribe the labor aristocracy in the first world. And yeah, there certainly is an element of that. And there certainly are like welfare states and things like that. But just none of this really checks out, because it seems to be suggesting that there's no potential for revolutionary consciousness because people have it so good in the first world. Right, so there's no potential because people have it so good in the first world, and then the inverse of that, the meaning of that, is that people need to be super exploited and super oppressed and in the third world, and that will automatically give rise to the kind of consciousness, the revolutionary consciousness that will make socialist revolution possible. But of course, we know that there's many places in the third world that don't have revolutionary socialist movements. So this idea is completely complicated by that fact, you know. Where is I mean, we can point to India and the Philippines and so on as being positive examples, but there's many other different countries in the third world that don't have revolutionary movements, that have all of the objective conditions that third worlds would say provide the basis for socialist revolution, and they don't have successful socialist movements. So what's going on there? Inversely, or I should say, at the other side of the spectrum, in the first worlds, there really aren't very many movements, and those movements that are in places that people would sometimes refer to as first world often have different elements to them. For example, like the national question or whatever it might be. So I know it's a tricky question. It's not quite as cut and dry or as black and white as it may seem. There is an element of truth to what the third worldists are saying, and I do agree with some of their conclusion or with some of the points they make, but I think that the fundamental conclusion that there's no potential for revolution in the first world, I think is a real. I think it's a miss, and I just don't think it's correct. I think that that's fundamentally a deviation from what Engels said in Socialism, Utopian, and Scientific. You know, yeah. There was another point I wanted to make, but I can't remember right now. So there's my rant.
But yeah, I agree with pretty much all of what you said. So yeah.
Yeah. But you know, it's the thing is, the point I wanted to make was that if you read Lenin's What Is to Be Done, one of the points that he really hammers home, and some people find this quite difficult to accept, but one of the points that he makes is that in order for there to be a revolutionary movement, there has to be revolutionary theory. And where does revolutionary theory come from? Revolutionary theory, Lenin posits anyway, comes from the vanguard, you know, and the vanguard party has to deliver that. So when we look at these other countries in the third world who haven't got success, or up and running, I should say, revolutionary socialist movements now, we still see that the issue is that there is no revolutionary theory that's able to provide the conditions for revolutionary movements, you know. So I think that suggesting that the condition of super exploitation in and of itself is the prerequisite for revolution is an incomplete picture, to say the least. Even if it's not completely incorrect, I think it's an incomplete picture. You know, certainly being more oppressed is going to make you more prone to revolution. Obviously, absolutely, there's no doubt about it. But it's also not true to say that like these people in the third world like they actually have nothing to lose but their chains. That's also not true, because of course, like individually and personally, people have so much to lose other than their chains. You know, people have relationships, people have family, people have children, people have lives, people have even if they're living in the most abject poverty, people have so much to lose by engaging in revolutionary war. So much their entire lives. Do you know what I mean? So this is why I fundamentally disagree with the point about third worldism, about revolution only being possible in the third world. I just think the basis for it is incorrect, you know, and I think it's only one piece of a much larger puzzle, you know. There is, I don't want to deny fully, because at the same time there is in the first world, we can see the pacifying effects of the labor aristocracy and super exploitation, and some degree of trickle down from the imperialists and so on and so forth. We can see some level of that, but also not that much. There are many, many people living in poverty. There are many sincere proletarians in the first world, and engaging sincerely in proletarian activity, like actually at the point of production in factories and so on and so forth, selling their labor power, generating surplus value, and so on and so forth. You know, so yeah, those are some scattered thoughts. I probably need to sit down and like write this out and actually systematize my thoughts a bit, because it's all very shotgun approach at the moment. It's all very scatterbrained. But yeah. Those are many.
I think that was good. I think it was a good summation.
I appreciate you saying that, but I think it was very oh, here's this point, here's that point, here's that point, here's the blah 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 blah. So anyway, yeah, I don't know if many third worlders watching this will be thoroughly convinced, but I would be interested in engaging with this further, because you know, I do think it's an interesting question, and there is I do think that there is some, you know, sliver of truth in a lot of the arguments that they make, if that makes sense.
Absolutely.
Okay, let me see. So we did the question on third worldism. We did Stonewall Rights and Common Hero Collective. Okay. Oh, I'll just quickly answer the questions with regard to republicanism in Ireland. Don't do drugs, kids, says Paul. Would you consider doing a video on the collaboration between the IRA and left-wing South African liberation parties and trade unions? Maybe that's it's an interesting topic to learn about. I've only ever read about it in passing. I've never actually like dived into it as like a proper like research topic, but it might be interesting to do on the new channel that I'm putting together at the moment. It's going to be called An Irish Republican. I've got a couple of people help me out with this at the moment. I'm engaging with some revolutionary socialist Republicans, and we're putting together some work for that channel, so stay tuned to that. I was hoping to have this up and running by the end of the month, but actually these things always take a lot longer than expected, especially if you're, you know, liaising with multiple different people and revolutionaries and all that sort of stuff, so that can be tough. The Classical Republican asked, Paul, would you do a video on Republican Sinn Féin? Yeah, that'd be cool. I think they're an interesting revolutionary force, and Rory O'Braddock was a great revolutionary figure, and there's a lot to talk about there that I think is very useful and very, very progressive. So I definitely consider doing a video on Republican Sinn Féin on that other channel, on the channel that's dedicated specifically to dealing with the particularities of the Irish Revolution. So that's maybe something to look into in the future. And the other question is, when will the channel be opened? Ideally, it would have been up and running this Friday, but that's definitely not going to happen at this rate. It's probably going to be a couple of weeks from now, so hopefully January 2022. Fingers crossed. Let's see how it goes. Okay, those are the questions on republicanism that I saw there. There was a question from Nizumiku. Paul, have you read the materialist feminists Delphi and Wittig, or some of the rad femmes Dworkin and McKinnon? In my opinion, works like towards a feminist theory of the state or are important for Marxists. No, I haven't read that. Spooky, have you read any of these?
I have not read them. I am slightly familiar with Monique Wittig's work. I'm more critical. I think Anuradha Gandhi, if you're very interested in sort of really theoretically dealing and critiquing and engaging with these radical feminism and materialist feminism, I really recommend Anuradha Gandhi's Philosophical Trends in the Feminist Movement. I think I mentioned this before.
Me too.
But sort of a component of a component of Wittig's materialist feminism is sort of she sort of formulates this theory of women as a class, which is just it's a very odd and
That's anti-Marxist.
really sort of, yeah, it's an anti-Marxist sort of conception of class. And I sort of feel like Fatigue sort of places too much emphasis on the sexual division of labor rather than the relations of private property. But yeah, I do think it's also important to engage with sort of various theoretical trends, both in feminism and sort of in the realm of queerness as well. I mean, like reading a lot of queer theory, I mean, as bourgeois as they may be, is also really important. Like Butler, even Foucault. I mean, like as much as he's hated his work on the history of sexuality, is, you know, very important to engage with. So yeah, I think it's important for Marxists to learn from and engage with all of these theoretical trends.
Definitely engage them. There's no reason why Marxists can't. There is sometimes a pretty nasty trend where people will say, "Oh no, don't read that. That's revisionist. That's bourgeois. That's postmodernist. That's blah 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 blah." But no, engage with them critically. Engage with them, but just engage with them critically. You know what I mean? And I think that's the best way to go about it. Of course, read your Mao first, read your Marx, Lenin, and Engels, Stalin first, so you do have a firm theoretical grounding. Please do not dive into postmodernism before having a firm Marxist, historical, materialist basis. But once you do have a firm grasp of those things, then yeah, absolutely deal with them, dive into them, engage with them. I think particularly that question or that particular point about women being a separate class is it's particularly nefarious in terms of like what it means, because that would fundamentally mean that like a woman who's a factory owner, a business owner, an imperialist, maybe let's say like a full-on imperialist, you know, who's overseeing monopoly capitalism and banking capital, and industrial capital, and all this sorts of stuff, is the same class as a proletariat or someone who's just scrubbing toilets all day. That's the same class. Like, that's just objectively nonsense. Like, come on, really? But this is I've heard MLs on Turf Island say this, which is
Oh no.
yeah, so-called MLs anyway. Self-proclaimed MLs, we'll say. It's a really wild. It just totally deviates from the Marxist conception of what class is, and I suppose that's given me quite a dogmatic understanding of what class is. I can sometimes be quite mechanical in my understanding of class. I'm very like to the word of what Engels and Lenin say. Like, I just totally reject anything outside of that, because it just seems to take people down extremely reactionary routes, and yeah, no, I'd be very, very skeptical of anyone who's trying to say things like women are a separate class to men. It just doesn't. It's just not a Marxist analysis of class. It's like one of these bourgeois liberal conceptions of class, where you have people talking about like the political classes or the precariat or the PMC or whatever. You know, it's just these just aren't classes. These are just objectively not different classes. You know, this is not. The class analysis that's presented here is not conducive to revolution, to successfully carrying out class struggle and bringing about proletarian revolution, you know, and it obfuscates and it causes confusion, and it makes people see the wrong people as their enemies and the wrong people as their friends. Do you know what I mean? There was actually a pretty funny film recently. Have you seen that? Don't Look Up. Have you seen that?
No, I've been meaning to look at that recently.
It's pretty well. Actually, the analysis in it is largely pretty liberal. It's pretty kind of got a liberal environmentalist outlook. But there's kind of one funny moment in it where like one of the guys is saying like it's us. It's like you, the working classes, and us, the cool rich, together against the elites, or something like that. I was like, wait, what? The cool rich and the working classes are together on the same side? What?
Of
Anyway.
course.
But you know, you do get
Gotta
this.
get that George
You do get this shit.
funny.
Yeah, it's like, oh, it's everyone against the PMC, and it's like, what the fuck are you talking about? What are you talking about, you lunatics? Get out of here. Sorry. Anyway, that's where we are. Okay, let me see. Are there any other questions that we had on the chat here? I think it's probably time to wind down. We're about 2.5 hours in. Let me just see if we have anything else here. Oh, did you give your thoughts on Le Chinois?
I'm gonna be real with you. Like, I think I heard about that from your stream with Premiere. the Premier
Oh, yeah,
Lyle's.
yeah, 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 yeah. Match.
Yeah, I think they recommended it, so I checked it out. I'm gonna be real with you. I did not get it. I mean, I'm just really confused. Like Godard is sort of a very odd sort of auteur in that way.
Mm.
I just I didn't get it really. And it might be, uncultured, right? Maybe the film snobs will be like, how dare you not understand? It's really simple. And I looked it up. I still don't I still don't get it. It's a very sort of it's an artistic film. But yeah,
Okay.
I really didn't understand it. Have you seen it, Paul? Or do you have
No,
any thoughts on
I've
that?
I've I've only seen the trailer for it, and I've had a few friends recommended it to me, saying that it's quite funny and entertaining and amusing. And there's also apparently some elements of truth in it. I don't know. I think there's like a one thing about I saw like there's like one clip where they talk about how there's like a friendly communism and there's a threatening communism, and I think it's talking about the Sino-Soviet split and how Soviet communism became this friendly, peaceful coexistence thing, whereas those who followed the Sino side of the split were proposing, well, still proposing like revolution by force, the people rising up in arms to take power. And so this became like the scary communism that was stamped down on. And yeah, I think there's probably an element of truth to that, but I mean that's just like a little 1 or 2 minute clip that I saw from it, and it seems like a fun film, but maybe it's too artsy.
It is. It is a very fun film. I probably have a very simple mind. I didn't really get it. The if you're watching it, the Mao song they have in there, it's like the Mao Mao song. There, it's pretty funny, and it is an entertaining sort of work by itself.
Well, I'm definitely I'm gonna have to watch that in the next couple of days. Actually, maybe that'll be my maybe I'll set that as a New Year's resolution for myself. Maybe I'll get to that on the 1st of January or something like that. Okay, okay. Okay, great stuff. I think that's probably a good point to wrap up. We're about 2.5 hours in. After this point, we're just going to be incoherently rambling even further than we have done. I'm sure I've done my share of incoherent rambling. You've been quite concise and coherent. I haven't, especially not in my rants about third worldism. But I think we might wrap this up here. I I was going to ask you if there are any organizations or creators you wanted to shout out or anything like that, or if there was anything else you wanted to say, but I think we've already actually covered that. I think we've already
Yeah,
answered.
I think we already did.
We did spoilers. I should have put a spoiler warning there. Is there any final words that you wanted to say? That sounds very I don't know, scary when I say, do you have any final words? Any last words? But is there any message you would like to convey to the people? Perhaps a message of revolutionary optimism for the people coming into 2K22. Anything else you want to say before we wrap it up?
Sort of on the topic of gay communism, sort of once again, right? It's important not to fall into sort of this idealism or sort of this sort of very crude understanding of queerness. Sort of all of these modes of oppression, patriarchy, queer oppression, all these modes of oppression, sort of fundamentally are tied to capitalism. And so if you have an outlook on sexuality and gender that doesn't look at capitalism, at the relations of private property, you are going to have a very insufficient theory of gender and sexuality. And so sort of that's what I would emphasize. If you want to learn more about gay communism, and just start, there's a whole body of literature out there. I think in one of your videos, Prol Cult said that the problem with communist gay literature isn't that it's under theorized, that it's underread.
Yeah. That
and I mean that is so true. There is so much literature out there that I personally still have to read, and it's a shame that I haven't gone to them, but I will. So I'll try to throw out some recommendations if you really want to like study this question deeply. So Leslie Feinberg's, I already mentioned Stonebush Blues a while ago, but also Feinberg's series Lavender and Reds. It's a 120, I think, part series on sort of the history of homosexuality and communism. It's very informative, and Feinberg pulls from a lot of different sources. I already recommended the Los Angeles research groups towards the scientific analysis with gay question. I believe Paul also recommended in his video about trans liberation, sort of Red Switzerland?
The Red Flag.
Red Star
Switzerland.
Switzerland.
Yeah, the Red Star. I think there's a couple names. Red Star, Red Flag, Switzerland, Marxism and Queer Emancipation, I think is what it's called.
Yes. Yes, that's a very good and interesting piece that I think people ought to grapple with. I'd also recommend John D'Amelio's work, Capitalism and Gay Identity. It sort of historicizes sort of what it means to be gay and how sort of that sort of emerged under capitalism as well. I mean, there's just so many different ways you can learn about these, but sort of those are sort of foundational texts that I would recommend. But yeah, just remember, class outlook is sort of what remains most important in sort of when looking at theories of gender and sexuality. Anything on
Holy
your end, Paul?
No, that was so good and so articulately put. I would actually, anything I add to this will just take away from what you just said. Anything I try to contribute will just bring down the level of discourse. I think you hit the nail on the head. That was brilliant, and I think that was a great way to end it. I'm just going to do a quick shout out to the comrades I see in the chat there. Thanks for being here. Thanks for watching this. I hope you've enjoyed it. I hope you've gotten something out of it. Please subscribe to Spooky Scary Socialist channel. Check out the new videos. I'm really looking forward to the video, hopefully, if this occurs. Although we're not meant to quote Spooky on this, but maybe a video about terror in the French Revolution. Maybe. I do look forward to whatever is produced anyway. Please do subscribe to Spooky, and all the best. Everybody have a happy new year. Give a little bit of solidarity to comrades I see in the chat there now. Norman Keena, Frog Boy, Peanut Butter Cup 13, Wabba Cohen, Constantine Bluz, good to see you, Constantine, Genie Bottle, Genie Bottle, thinking of the song now, Marxism, Araism, Matler, Joe the Hero Squatter, Jessidiah, and who else can I see here? Matthew Calise, Silent Mandeville. Hope you're all keeping well. Guys, enjoy the new year. Have a great one. Hope you're all keeping well, safe, happy. Lots of love and solidarity from Ireland. Red salute, August Slán go fóill. Take care, guys. Bye bye.